I have 1 o'clock. Welcome to our work session for housing stability for renters. I'm Councilmember Jason Dozier. I am the chair of the Community Development and Human Services Committee. Also am the council member for Atlanta City Council District 4. And I know we have a number of organizations in the room. We have some members of the general public in the room. Before we get started, because I am curious to see who we have with us today, I just want to give the general public an understanding of why I thought it was so important for us to do this work session. Rents in Atlanta in the last 2 years have gone up roughly 30%. As Jimmy McMillan once said, the rent is too damn high. And recognizing that renters make up such a large proportion of our city, and they get left out of the conversation far too often in terms of housing policy. I think about the displacement-free zones we've created to protect legacy homeowners. I think about the homeowner assistance programs that we have for down payment assistance for new homeowners. I think about the programs that we have with so many different offices and departments across the city to create homeownership, which is a great path for so many people. It builds wealth for so many people. But the reality is that the majority of our city is made up of renters. In many of our communities, the renting population is the vast majority. My home community in Mechanicsville, 80% of our community are renters. Neighborhoods like English Avenue and Vine City, closer to 90%. And so when I think about where the policies that the city has developed in tandem with Invest Atlanta and Atlanta Beltline and Atlanta Housing and other program partners have been focused in terms of housing and typically protects our homeowning population, which is an important part of our city, but we got to protect our renters too. And I know there have been a lot of organizations doing a lot of phenomenal work on this front, and that's why we invited many of these organizations to come to us today to talk with us about potential opportunities for future policies that the city can pursue to protect our renting population. With that being said, just want to do a quick kind of unofficial roll call because just based on who we have listed to present today. Housing Justice League, I see you're in the room today. Atlanta Housing, I see you're in the room today. Office of Housing and Community Development, thank you, good to see y'all. Atlanta Legal Aid, all right. Any other organizations in the room today with us? Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, anyone else? Atlanta Beltline Inc. Anyone else? And I know there's a couple of members from the public here. One of the things that I shared before a few folks walked in, we do have sign-up sheet for public commentary. So after our presentations, we're going to give folks from the public an opportunity to speak to the issues that we discussed today. I recognize that I am the only council member here right now. I know a few folks are on the way. I also know if y'all read the AJC this morning, you know a couple of our colleagues came down with COVID. Also, one of our colleagues just had a baby on Monday. So there's a lot going on in the city of Atlanta, but we'll keep pressing forward. These meetings are recorded and shared to the public, and I think at the very least it's important to have this conversation, whether it's one of us, two of us, or 15 of us, to make sure that we can get the policies necessary to protect our renting population. So I didn't want to postpone a meeting, recognizing some of those things are happening concurrently, but I am excited about the discussion and the conversation. I'm excited to hear from some familiar faces and see some familiar faces in this setting especially. But at the end of the day, I just wanted to welcome you all to City Hall, City Council, and our main chambers, and we can get this show on the road. With that being said, our first presenter is the Housing Justice League. You go ahead and come up to the podium. And, when we typically do committee meetings, we'll do public commentary up front, and I'll usually set aside opportunities for tell people you have 3 minutes to speak, and then later there might be questions. We're not going to do that. You have take as much time as you need, and I'm sure I'll have questions, but mainly want to ensure that for the public record we knew what the issues were, and that we had an opportunity to use this as a launch pad, if you will, to get some goodness for our city. So I just appreciate y'all once again, but just know I'm not going to be banging the gavel telling you got 30 seconds. I want to give you an opportunity to share with the city of Atlanta what you're working on and what you think the city should be working on. So go ahead, Allison.
All right.
Yeah, one moment. And just for everyone's awareness, even though this, the acoustics now are great, I know that I can hear you. We want to make sure the folks at home are able to hear you as well, so got to get the microphone working.
All right, is this better?
Much better. Thank you so much. Thank you, Damon.
All right, thank you. All right, we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Johnson. I am the Executive Director with Housing Justice League. We are a community-based, community-led organization that's doing some grassroots organizing in different areas of the city, but our primary work is with renters throughout the city of Atlanta, both in fair market housing and also those that are in subsidized housing. We've been doing some of that work for about 5 years now, and its work is very important to us, just like Councilperson Dozier said earlier, rents in the city of Atlanta have just increased by more than 30%. And it is very, very difficult for folks to remain in their communities. So over the summer, prior to the summer, during the pandemic, folks that we organized and worked with were very concerned about their ability to remain in their communities. And what are some of the things that we could possibly do and work on together, not just as an organization, but as a community collectively, to really build some community power that was going to really sustain residents where they are. So like Jason said, oftentimes in our communities, there is a real advantage for homeowners and a real disadvantage for renters. And we find that very true even in those small networks where there's supposed to be democratic processes of participation. That doesn't often happen because in our communities, sometimes renters are less valued. But we know that's not true. So we're going to go ahead and think about, walk you through some of the things and opportunities that renters see that will support them, and again, that will support them in sustaining and remaining in their communities. One thing that we did learn, we did through some research with not just ourselves, with folks of the legal minds, was to really get out there and do some data. And what we found was that renters make up at least 56% of Atlanta's residents. Then we also understood that 49% of residents in Atlanta spend more than 30% of their income on rents. I don't have to tell y'all that, y'all know that. With that being said, it's very hard for folks to remain in Atlanta as rents have increased, but wages are decreasing, and as folks have had to find other places to live, there's no room for affordability in the city of Atlanta right now. All right, so what we also learned that Georgia is one of the most landlord-friendly states. We don't have a problem with that, but we do have a problem with that because renters are not in this space. There's an imbalance of power with landlords and renters, and that has to change. If we are going to recognize and understand and have our renters be very participant in processes in the city of Atlanta, throughout the state of Georgia, then there must be a place where there's balance between tenant and landlord. They have contracts, and that's a two-way deal. What we learn is that there's frictionless eviction process, really easy for a landlord to evict a tenant at any time that they want. There are not enough protections for renters with this process. Oftentimes people come to us because they are being unjustly evicted. If they are complaining about maintenance issues or repairs, then there is heavy retaliation against them from their landlords. And they are able to go to the courthouse and file evictions. And oftentimes, even before that, it's the scare tactic because people are afraid that they will have no roof over their head and they can't provide a safe place for their families. So this is something that has to change. Although it may not come from this body of work has to set the precedence that we agree that balance needs to be totally changed. So also the ban on rent control. Georgia currently has a state statute that bans rent control or rent stabilization. With the rental increases, that has to change. You cannot walk in the door and demand that people's rents increase by 50 to 60% within the term of the lease. Nobody can afford that. That can't happen. It's very interruptive and it's disruptive for children and families that are already participating in their communities. Low property taxes. For who? Low property taxes, that doesn't really exist any longer. You know, people are really able to come and buy your 5As at any time that, you know, a resident is behind on their taxes. We've got to figure out a way to include these people so they are not being displaced in these ways. All right, so since the pandemic, over 180,000 evictions have been filed in the 5 county metro areas of Atlanta, despite the moratoriums. So we're talking about DeKalb, Gwinnett, Cobb, Fulton, and Clayton. In these areas, they are heavily populated by low-income folks, majority black folks. So why does this exist? What really undergirds this? Why? Why don't we have more protections for people living in these areas? It's absurd, and we have got to be able to change that. We all know that evictions increase the likelihood of mental health crisis. We see it play out every day, and not just through gun violence, through other types of violence. We know it also causes depression. We know it also causes lower birth weights and poverty. It's very hard for people to come up with deposits amounts to this day. So if they're having to redo that entire cycle where they are being, administrative fees are being extracted out of their monthly income, it's almost impossible for folks to land and get back up on their feet. It's going to put them in a more dire position to find housing that's more deplorable. And, you know, when you have lower rent, sometimes it equates to really poor maintenance issues. So what we have right here is that evictions disproportionately affect black communities and communities of colors. You see right in the heavy red area, those are areas in our city that are being heavily, heavily gentrified. And that's a little south of Atlanta in the real burgundy piece. That's in the green, darker green. Those areas around southwest Atlanta, College Park, East Point. But these are the areas where our folks are being heavily displaced. All right, so that we know that, just to give you all that little background, what can we do about this? Members in different communities want to create and have created something that's called a Tenant's Bill of Rights. This is something that's attaching itself from city to city and state to state. People are working in collaborative ways in order to bring more awareness around renters' rights, especially in the South. We are about 4 decades behind other cities out west and cities up north. The South has got to be able to catch up. As our population grows, then our policies have got to change. So some areas where we really want to highlight, where we feel like we can get some support from council persons who are not here and those that are here, are areas around our right to counsel. Areas where, okay, yes, you go ahead. Where we want to be able to establish an office of the tenant's advocacy, a right to cure and a right to renew around the Tenant Opportunity Purchasing Act. So what do we mean by when we talk about right to counsel? So 90% of landlords are represented by legal counsel in evictions. Fewer than 10% of tenants have representation. If you ever have an opportunity, I would ask that you go down to the courthouse on a Tuesday or Thursday, and it is a mass hoarding of evictions. So currently, tenants in Atlanta are facing evictions. They do not have guaranteed access to legal representation to defend themselves in court. Most people don't understand what the eviction process is. It is a very traumatic and terrifying moment anytime that you are in front of someone who's making a determination about where you are going to live. This means most tenants navigating an eviction, even those facing a potentially illegal eviction, do not have the means to argue on their own behalf and protect their rights to stay in their homes. This dynamic causes tenants who do not have the means to have an attorney to be severely disadvantaged in the eviction process, where the laws in place already highly favor property owners. Our eviction filing rate was among the highest in the country, and it far outpaced neighboring states and cities. Georgia's 2008-16 eviction filing rate was 16.8%. Neighboring states range from 3.9 to 6.8. So what's happening in other places around the country? New York has one. A few other people have some things around right to counsel, but for us, we thought that New York was a better example. And we thought that because before the pandemic, evictions were a major contributor to instability in low-income neighborhoods of color. But over the past few years, we found a correlation between neighborhoods with high share of Black and Latinx renters and evictions controlling for poverty levels. New York's right to counsel law went into effect in 2017 and has been highly effective at keeping tenants in their homes. The law provides tenants who are under 200% of the federal poverty line with access to counsel in housing court. Prior to the rights to counsel implementation, only 1% of tenants were represented by an attorney in eviction cases, magnifying the power of imbalance between landlords and tenants. In the last quarter of 2021, 74% of tenants facing eviction cases were represented by a lawyer, according to the Office of Civil Justice. For the third year in a row, 84% of tenants represented in housing court by the right to counsel lawyers were able to remain in their home. So folks understand and you recognize that when there's an opportunity and there's some level setting in terms of representation, we have much better outcomes. Much better outcomes. So here are some of I'm just going to read off a couple of the effects of right to counsel. Right to counsel measures for tenants and eviction proceedings have been enacted in 7 cities to date: New York, San Francisco, Newark, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Boulder, and Baltimore. In New York, 86% of tenants were able to remain in their homes who had representation as a result of the city's right to counsel legislation. In San Francisco, the eviction filing rate decreased by 10% between 2018 and 2019. Of those receiving full representation, 67% stayed in their home. So providing a right to counsel really allows people and families to keep their homes and communities, and in the time of a pandemic, promotes public health. So the city should be able to help support funding for this legal representation. All right, let me turn it over to you. Okay.
So I'm Anton. I'm also a member of Housing Justice League, and another thing we want to propose is the right to cure. So for the right to cure, tenants would now have 7 days after an eviction filing to cure non-payment of rent, but currently, but must pay court costs, administrative fees, and have an eviction filing on record that follows them for decades. So that's how it currently works. The city should advocate for a state law that would provide for written notice and a 7-day right to cure before the eviction may be filed. And this would be a win-win solution. Tenants cure non-payment or deficiency, so that prevents the eviction and avoids court costs and fees. Property owners get paid without having to go to court, and tenants avoid the long-term effects of eviction filings. So why we need the right to cure? The cost of evictions to society, families, and children are substantial, as we have said before. Eviction is a leading cause of homelessness. A notice period would provide time for tenants to cure non-payment of rent or other lease issues. And Georgia has the nation's third fastest eviction process. So that goes back to the frictionless evictions, which is why it's so landlord friendly. We have no notice period to allow tenants to cure non-payment or other lease issues. Georgia law now requires notice to tenant, but it doesn't have to be in writing. So once notice is provided, the landlord's now free to go to court immediately to seek an eviction. And once that eviction is filed, it follows the family for decades, makes it impossible to rent a decent home, mainly popping up in a credit score, which happens in any tenant screening process. To date, 40 states have provided a notice period for tenant to cure prior to an eviction filing, but Georgia is behind and Georgia has nothing like this. Some of the 40 states that are included are Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, Texas, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and Alabama. And the American Bar Association adopted a resolution in February of this year urging states to adopt 10 eviction protection laws. Number one was to give tenants notice and an opportunity to cure the non-payment of rent or other failure in performance before an eviction can proceed. So this seems like a very simple, easy win to protect tenants from eviction. The next thing that we're proposing is to establish an office of the tenant advocate. We want to see a new office established in Atlanta to focus on enforcing existing protections to reduce the number of incidents of tenants and families living in uninhabitable conditions or experiencing illegal evictions, discrimination, and harassment. By establishing dedicated municipal staffing who can oversee the enforcement of existing tenant protections and ensuring that tenants are educated about their rights, tenants and families will be less vulnerable to abuse at the hands of some landlords who violate existing laws. Over the course of organizing, deep listening, and meeting with tenants at high risk of eviction and displacement, many renters emphasize a fundamental lack of accountability for landlords that violate the law. And while Georgia statute currently outlaws retaliation against tenants for organizing or for submitting code violation complaints, without a dedicated local enforcement, tenants continue to report consistent experiences of discrimination, habitability issues, and retaliatory evictions. And when we consider that there's no right to counsel, tenants can't properly articulate these violations via counterclaims because already the eviction process is so troubling, confusing, and disorienting. Now, this is a major problem, especially of the past few years, because of the corporate landlord and institutional investor. So, in a study that the Washington Post did, in 2015, 12% of all properties bought in Atlanta were by corporate landlords or institutional investors, so like private equity firms. That has now increased to 25%. And where you see the dark red, over 30% of all property purchases were made by an institutional investor in these areas. And as you can see, these are the areas similar to what you saw in the eviction filing rate and the Black census tracts. These are predominantly communities of color and Black communities. And what happens when private equity becomes your landlord? ProPublica did a great article that kind of outlines what happens. Private equity is not interested in property management. They're not even interested in renting. They're interested in the collateral value that a property has. So when they bundle up thousands of properties, they can offer that up as collateral to seek additional funding and go and make new investments or woo new investors. So a private equity firm has no hand in being a landlord, yet they're becoming landlords all over the city. And what that looks like are horrible, severe habitability issues and living conditions. This is a property in Greenbrier that we are working with to organize, and tenants have reported horrific living conditions, and there's been over 185 violations found at this apartment complex called Royal Oaks. And this is what happens when a corporate landlord becomes your landlord. They don't care about maintaining the property or making it habitable. They just care about bundling it into an asset to get more finance. So studies have shown that corporate landlords are 8% more likely to file an eviction. This was a study done in Atlanta in 2016. Corporate landlords are also more likely to use the threat of eviction. This was another study in 2020 in Atlanta. Properties owned and operated by LLCs are often neglected for maintenance, especially in lower income neighborhoods. There are 2 studies that have found this evidence. This is also what we see in our organizing work. And investment firms in possession of many properties will typically control the asset under an LLC or a shell company. This management practice makes the chain of ownership intentionally complicated in a way that makes it difficult for tenants to hold landlords accountable for bad behavior. So many tenants call a number that doesn't work or email someone an email that doesn't exist or never responds because of this shell company system. Corporate landlords have also been found to disproportionately target lower income and minority renters, which you saw in that Washington Post map of the percentage of homes being bought by private equity in 2021. So the first step to addressing this would be to have the Office of Tenant Advocacy to issue a lease registry. A lease registry requires a landlord to submit their leases for public record. This will allow the public to keep track of how housing costs are increasing and which landlords are acting predatorily. As a prerequisite for filing an eviction, landlords must submit their ledger of leases. And that's a very important part of what we think a lease registry could do about this issue. Los Angeles, Seattle, and Baltimore all have lease registries, and another benefit to a lease registry is it would make offering rental assistance more efficient. So right now, tenants have to submit a copy of an official lease to be eligible for these forms of assistance. Having a public record of that expedites that entire process. We know rent has increased over nearly 30% since the beginning of the pandemic, but we don't have good data on how that affects 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, single-family rentals, or 3-bedroom units. Having a lease registry would provide that type of information so we could see how affordability is being affected across the different renters in Atlanta. And through our organizing at Royal Oaks, the property that I just showed you, and our work on the Tenant Solidarity Hotline, we've identified evidence of mass lease purging, allowing corporate landlords to increase rent or file evictions based on non-existent lease violations. Typically, a corporate landlord will outsource property management to a third party, and there's really high turnover. So through our organizing work at Royal Oaks for the past 6 months, we've seen management turnover twice. So that's 3 different sets of people that tenants are talking to about the issues in their homes, and new lease terms are popping up. Studies by Arnold and Farrer have also identified similar things. So a citywide lease registry would allow the public to hold landlords accountable when they violate existing laws, reduce our eviction rate, and ensure tenants understand the terms of their leases. Additionally, there are other measures that we think this office could ensure. First, small place preservation. We're urging City Council to allocate funds from the Housing Trust Fund to support preservation to small mom-and-pop landlords and CDCs. We need to support the local landlords that don't have the resources to make their homes habitable when we know that the larger landlords are doing the opposite. We need to continue and expand the Beltline housing tax breaks to keep homes affordable and outside of the reach of private equity owners. And many corporate landlords accept housing subsidies from properties that they've acquired. For example, at Royal Oaks, there's another property that the corporate landlord owns called Greenbrier Mills, and we know that tenants there do receive a voucher. So the Office of the Tenant Advocate should strengthen these existing measures to protect these tenants who might be now have their voucher stewarded by a corporate landlord. And we need to define affordability as rent at 30% AMI rather than 50%. Additionally, utilities should be included in the calculation of affordability based on AMI percentage. If your rent is $400 and your utilities is $100, that's 25% of your rent, and that needs to be included and calculated in affordability. The final thing that we're proposing is the right to renew, or TOPA, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. In Georgia, there's no statute protecting a tenant's ability to stay in the homes they've built long-term. We believe that landlords should have to prove just cause to evict someone, and tenants should have the right to a comparable lease renewal. TOPA, or the Tenant Right to Purchase Act, is a measure introduced in jurisdictions like Washington, D.C. It allows for tenants who have come together as an association to have the right of first refusal when a property owner moves to make a sale. It also gives them the liberty to decide whether the property remains renter-based or tenants are able to pool together resources for ownership after a period of mandatory negotiation with the landlord. The frequency of tenants of all backgrounds having their homes sold out from under them is causing instability all over the city. We need robust, audacious protections to shift this balance of power towards the people. The homeowner as a longtime community member is a myth. Renters are steadfast members and should have a right to remain. And this is what we have also been organizing around in DeKalb County for Miss Juliet, who has been a resident in her home for over 27 years. She has paid her rent on time every single month and has paid that mortgage over multiple times as it's exchanged different owners who only see the collateral value or the investment value, and they don't see a home there. So we need a right of first refusal, and we need a Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act to protect longtime community members in the neighborhoods of Atlanta.
So in conclusion, we know that the right to cure is really going to be an opportunity to reduce the eviction rate. We also understand that the right to renew in TOPA is new to folks here in Georgia, but there's also opportunities for us to learn as a community together of how this actually works. Right here you see it a little diluted and folks may not really understand, but there's a whole entire long process that goes with that. It's going to take more than Housing Justice League to make this happen. But we also know that it increases the landlord's accountability, and that's what we need right now in the state of Georgia. But we have to do what we can do right here in the city of Atlanta to increase the accountability for landlords. We have not had one council person over the last 10 to 15 years introduce any policy around the protections of renters. That has to change. The makeup of Atlanta has changed, so we have to change with it. We have to have the political will to do it. We have the power to do it. So we're asking everybody to support us with this Tenants Bill of Rights. It's only going to increase transparency in the city, and it's also going to make Atlanta a really great place for people to remain. So yeah, that's it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. First, before I ask a couple questions, I do want to acknowledge my colleague, Councilmember Lilian Bakhtiari, joined us. So there's two of us now. Want to just ask a few questions, then Councilmember Bakhtiari, I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions as well. The first one that I had was with some of these things that y'all are advocating for. I know we were looking at Baltimore and New York and Los Angeles as far as best practices. Do we have any examples in state where some of these things have been implemented yet, or things that are being worked on? I don't know, Savannah, typical. Okay. So hey, Atlanta could be the first in the state and first in the region maybe on some of these issues. I am curious with the
Aren't we usually?
Yeah, there you go. Atlanta influenced everything, right? One of the things I'm interested in is the right to, well, a lot of the things that y'all are advocating for requires some state-level advocacy because of preemption. I'm curious about what efforts have been done so far in terms of state advocacy, recognizing, hey, it's an election year this year, or electing a new governor, lieutenant governor, everything down ballot. I've gotten to know you all over the years with your local work and that you're fighting for, and the organizing y'all have done in several of our apartments in the city, but I'm curious about what work you're doing at the state level to try to change some of these laws.
So there's some work happening in terms of building a table for a Georgia for All rent stabilization coalition, and that's happening all over the state of Georgia. On June 23rd, there's going to be an information session about that, how to get involved. what this coalition is doing and where can you onboard yourself. Right now, we've been really trying to work with folks in Albany, Georgia, and also Savannah, Georgia, in terms of bringing them to the table. There is a need for rent control. Otherwise, we would not be all over rural Georgia trying to get folks to be a part of this. We're not just trying to get them, but they're reaching out to us for help and support. And we just don't have all of the capacity that it's going to take to do this alone. So it's going to take everybody to really think of some comprehensive policies that's going to allow us to remove the current statute at the state's levels. But right now there is a table that's formed. It's a coalition called Georgia for All Rent Stabilization. And there are folks from Cobb County, Clayton County, and Gwinnett County that are engaged.
Thank you. Councilman Blackfield, yes?
I'm so sorry. Could you say that again? So have they found a way to navigate the preemption by the state?
No, it's work to do that.
Okay.
The coalition is building the table to do that, yeah.
Wonderful, okay.
Yes.
And then my other question was, I know that a lot of the proposals that are being made, I imagine folks that are landlords or representing landlords, I thank the Apartment Association for joining us today. Thank you for joining us and good to see you. I know they might have some concerns about, this is administratively burdensome to do this, or we know our industry might not support us for X, Y, Z. But one of the things I was really interested with regards to the registry, I imagine there might be an opportunity for buy-in because it provides or reduces information asymmetry. If you know what your competition is charging for leases, then it makes it easier for you to adjust your what you're charging because you know what the competition is doing across the street. I'm curious if in your studies or evaluation of these programs or policies, if you've seen any sort of, that's just a theory that I have that might work in that way and it could potentially get some support because of that. But I'm curious if y'all have seen anything like that and reflecting the data that you've looked at where there's been support for these sorts of initiatives because of additional opportunities for these private entities to be responsive to the data.
I'm going to let Anton also answer this because this is a part of the work that he's really building, but I just want to be really clear, to this Bill of Rights is for tenants' rights. And we are here supporting the rights of tenants and renters in this entire state. I cannot really speak to what the Apartment Association or the other landlords are doing, but we want to be able to build some really powerful tools that will protect renters.
Yes, and I would say generally with the lease registry, it has bipartisan support because, just take rental assistance as an example. There is a lot of worry about compliance issues in providing it. And, the fact of the matter is a lot of property management companies and a lot of landlords don't have that copy of the lease, or they just rolled over the tenant to a tenant at will because of the pandemic. So a lease registry would just expedite that entire process, which there is typically bipartisan support for that. Additionally, data on rent estimates is also very spotty and patchwork. This is due to how tax assessment records are produced only annually during tax season. So we have a lag in the data, and even, we know Zillow pulls from the tax assessor to produce their estimate. So having that public data is valuable to multiple parties. But most importantly, it's valuable to create landlord accountability and hold predatory landlords accountable when they violate existing protections for tenants.
Thank you. And I'll just say, too, my framing of that question was more me thinking who's going to be emailing me with their perspective, after conversations like this. But I appreciate that insight. Councilman Becker, do you have any questions that you want to ask?
Yeah, I want to, one of the things I want to say is I know what it must appear like to have just the two of us here, and I want you very much to know that this is a large majority of the reason that I ran. I've been a huge follower and supporter of Housing Justice League since y'all formed, and while we don't have other colleagues up here, you have two people up here that are going to champion this by all means necessary, or I should, yeah, we are. He will. And that will go a long way. And so to the pieces that I want to speak to, I think it's a very powerful thing when you have somebody in politics who has also entire background is community building, because fighting the market is like swimming against a riptide. And so I know that this is a lot of work. To any entities, corporate groups who may think that this is going to be harder on you, I would beg you to think about how hard it is to be a person in today's world, and living especially in the state, in the city, which was just marked the most difficult city to live in on minimum wage. So if nobody can live in your apartments because they can't afford it, then these types of measures would quite in fact benefit all of us, because if working people and people that drive our economy can't afford to live in these buildings, then we have nothing. So to the pieces that you've talked about, I will talk to you after this. We're calling it access to counsel, because right to anything in the South doesn't seem to fly well. But this is something that I've been working on the last year with AVLF, and I think we'll have some more updates for you in about a month. But it is something that I am determined to make happen this year. Yeah. Thank you.
We don't believe that housing is a bipartisan issue.
No, housing is a human right. Survival is not a bipartisan issue. Yeah. So, thank you so much for the work you all always do.
Thank you. All right, next up, Atlanta Housing.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Howard Grant. I'm Senior Vice President of Governmental External Affairs and Human Development, longest title in the agency, but with Atlanta Housing. Thank you for having this opportunity for us to come and talk about two of our programs related directly with housing. And the first one is our Housing Choice Voucher Program, and the other one will be our Home Flex Program. So to talk about our Housing Choice Voucher Program, I have Ms. Tracy Jones. She is our Senior Vice President of the Housing Choice Voucher Program.
Thank you and welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Grant said, I'm Tracy Jones. I'm the SVP of the Housing Choice Voucher Program with Atlanta Housing. And I'm excited to be here today just to share a little high-level overview of our program. If you know Section 8, we now call our program the Housing Choice Voucher Program, but most people know about Section 8. And this program is a tenant-based rental assistance program that assists extremely low and low-income individuals with renting safe, decent, and affordable dwellings within a private rental market. This Housing Choice Voucher is a portable voucher, which means families can relocate to anywhere in any city in the United States, including Guam and the Virgin Islands. So they can take this voucher and locate anywhere they would like to live. The Housing Choice Voucher, we set some goals at Atlanta Housing for our program.
Real quick, if you could raise the mic to your mouth a little bit.
Okay,
That's perfect.
My voice is very low. Excuse me. Some of our goals for the Housing Choice Voucher Program are to provide improved living conditions for extremely low-income families while maintaining their rental payments at an affordable level. We also like to affirmly affirm fair housing so that our individuals are protected under the fair housing laws. We promote freedom in housing, so families, once they get their voucher, provided that the landlord will accept our assistance, they have a choice of where they want to live. We ensure that we provide safe, decent, and affordable housing for our families, and we provide an incentive to our property owners to rent to our landlords. So not only do we give our families a housing assistance, we also incentivize our landlords for coming onto those programs, and I'll talk about that later in the presentation. And just an overview of the Housing Choice Funding Program. The Housing Choice Voucher Program is funded totally through federal funds from the Department of Housing and Urban Renewal, as we all know is HUD. Atlanta Housing provides housing assistance payments directly to the landlord on behalf of the participant, and the amount of the subsidy is based primarily on the participant income. None of our participants pay more than 30% of their income to rent and utilities, so we ensure that we maintain those levels of affordability. Our demographics, the housing choice demographics with Atlanta Housing is, we currently have 11,116 families on our housing choice voucher program. 1,490 of those families use our voucher to locate to other cities. They are ported out, and we even have a family who have moved to Hawaii. So there is those opportunities to relocate to wonderful places that we all probably want to live at. At least I do. Hawaii sounds like a good choice. And we have 9,611 families who reside within the city of Atlanta, and 15 of those family members hold a voucher. They own their home, so we were able to allow those families to use their voucher to purchase their home, and the funding that we provide for the voucher pays the mortgage. One thing we realized when we were operating our Housing Choice Voucher program is that we have families that are at risk. We developed what we call our Haven program to provide stable, affordable housing for families at risk, combined with supportive services and case management. And some of our partners in this endeavor includes the Atlanta Public Schools, Partners for Home, DFACS, United Way, HUD, the City of Atlanta, to name a few of our partners. And what our Haven program looks like, we started it in 2017 as a pilot program for case management. And what we were really trying to do was to expedite the process of families who are at risk or are homeless, those who are living on the street or in couch surfing or just didn't have stable housing. And what we did in our department was we developed a case management model. So that means any person that was working with the family work with that family from end to end. We ensured that we got them through the process very quickly. They didn't get caught up in our regular housing choice voucher participants who were searching for units, and we were able to reduce their search time before we started this program from 160 days down to about 60 to 90 days. Now that has been impacted somewhat due to the pandemic, but we ensure that our families are touched. We know where they're at all times, and we're expediting them through the process. If any Haven family comes through with the voucher, they go ahead of anyone else on the program who's looking or searching. We push their voucher through so that they can get housed quickly. Another program we created is called a Lease in Place program, and this is a very good program to ensure renter stability. And what this means is that we work with landlords to say, hey, this family lives in your unit. We'll give you the voucher if you allow that person to remain in the unit, if you would accept that voucher. That way, the person doesn't have to physically move. The landlord is now receiving timely market comparable rents, and the family remains stable and there's no vacancy loss. So we don't get a lot of landlords working with us with this program, but we've had a few. And it's seamless. I mean, the families we just transfer the program. It's not even, they don't even realize there's really a change. So we're looking to do more of that. And these are some of our programs that we have created under the Haven program since 2017. 525 vouchers allocated for our Flow program. And this is working with Partners for Home, where we work with families who are in permanent or supportive housing. They come out of that program, come onto a voucher, and they get light touch case management so that they're successful in housing. And then the cycle continues with the program. We extend those vouchers. We created, if you all remember back when the Peachtree and Pine was closing, and you had those families that we needed to house. Atlanta Housing offered 100 vouchers for that program, and currently we still have 83 families who are utilizing that voucher, and we were able to assist some of those families who were sure to experience homelessness by offering 100 vouchers, and we're still working with those families today. We have one of our prize programs, Dr. Grant's favorite thing. We call it the Supportive Housing Voucher for Homeless Families, where we work directly with APS. And we work with those case managers to provide housing to families and students who are homeless, because we know housing is a right, and when families are not housed and children are trying to go to school, we don't see a good result for those children. So this is one of our prize programs that we created. We also have what we call the integrated care for permanent supportive housing, and our RISE too, where we work directly for Partners for Home. These agencies make referrals to us. We assist their families and get them housed. Another one is we work with VASH, the VA, working with veterans. We currently have 270 vouchers allocated for that program. And we have what we're trying to relaunch is our Next Step Youth Program, where we will work with DFACs to work with homeless youth, as well as what we call our Family Unification Program, where we work directly with DFACs to help families who are broken and separated through children being taken due to situations in the family. We provide housing first so that families can be reunified with their, mothers and fathers can be reunified with their children. But first thing that has to happen, they have to have housing. So we have a lot of programs. So we have a few more. FUP Youth is one we just spoke about. And just last year, HUD initiated the Emergency Housing Voucher Program, which is due to COVID, HUD wanted to provide vouchers to get families off the street who were impacted with COVID. We have 202 of those vouchers, and currently we have 37 families housed. The challenge with this program is most of the families that are in need of these vouchers are one-bedroom units. And as most of you know, we do not have one-bedroom units in the city, so we have been really challenged with trying to get families housed. We have issued 192 vouchers for this program, but only have housed 37 families. So we're kind of in a crisis trying to assist. We are now working with DeKalb County, DeKalb Housing Authority, and Fulton Housing Authority to see if we can start porting some of those families that are holding vouchers to those communities so that these families who need the assistance in housing can be housed. Their voucher will not expire, so if it takes them 2 years to get housed, the program expires in 2023, we will work with them until they get housed. And then during the pandemic, we created a program called Crisis Rapid, I don't know if I'm getting this right, Dr. Grant, COVID Response Rapid Rehousing Program, where we just gave 100 vouchers to Partners for Home to assist getting families off the street at that very moment and get them into hotels. So we allocated 100 vouchers and 91 families are housed. So some things we do to ensure families are stabilized through our Landlord program. So we have a pretty robust Landlord and Inspection Services program. And we have one of the premier programs in the country, and we say this because we exceed quality assurance standards, HQS. Our inspection services team employs what we call an enhanced inspection process, and that's what we require, the same thing that you would want in your home, an AC. It's 100 degrees in Georgia in some time. We require landlords to either have a window AC or a HVAC system so that families can be comfortable. We require screens on the windows, things like that. The same things we want on our homes, we're requiring our landlords to do those things. Annually, we process about 24,000 inspections. So we do initial inspections, annual inspections, emergency inspections, re-inspections, but we have a team of 19 inspectors, and they literally take care of our Housing Choice Voucher Program as well as our Home Flex Program, which my colleague will talk about shortly. AHA operates its Landlord Services Program in comparison to offering market rents. So we have what we call payment standards. We hire a third-party vendor to survey the city of Atlanta to give us comparable rents, and in most markets, we can meet that market rent. So we're able to pay the rent that landlords are asking. As everyone knows, our rents have increased by 30%, and we're almost meeting most of those rents in most markets. And one thing we're very excited about is that we have created an automated process for our landlords through our landlord portal, where it's paperless and virtual, and landlords can just go on and conduct business without the assistance of staff, and they just, get whatever they need to get done expeditiously, automated, and virtually, which makes it better for them as well as us. We realize that participants, families run into a challenge when they're trying to lease up in the city. There's many barriers that they run into, but one of the biggest is having that security deposit. So we offer a leasing incentive fee. We call it our LIF, and it's in the hopes of removing financial burdens to the family. It removes those credit issues. We talk to landlords and say, hey, this payment, we pay the exact contract rent. So if a unit is $3,000, we'll pay $3,000 in leasing incentive fee. That fee is non-refundable. The landlord gets to keep it, and it's the way we conduct business to get our families into units. And then we also follow up to make sure those families are assisted. So we have two LIFT programs. One is a standard and one is an automatic. An automatic LIFT is anyone who gets a voucher at new admissions automatically gets that leasing incentive fee. So they don't even have to worry about how I'm going to come up with this deposit. And our standard leasing incentive fee, it assists families who are in the move process, who are already on the program, to cover those expenses. Excuse me.
If you could lift your mic again.
I'm sorry. Some of our enhancements, let me keep it up here. Some of our enhancements with Atlanta Housing is we have an online property owner briefing. So where landlords used to have to come to Atlanta Housing and do their briefings to learn about the program, now they just go online to do that. Our online property application is the same kind of methodology. You just upload your documents and we approve you within 48 hours if you meet the criteria. All of our contracts are now e-signed. You don't have to go through emailing it back and forth. We send it to you, you sign it, it comes back to us. We have instituted energy efficiency rent boosts. And this is funding that we give to our landlords for increasing the efficiencies within units. And they can go as high as $175 in the rent, in addition to the rent. We have an upfront rent estimate program because landlords call us all the time and say, how much would you pay for this unit? We now have a process that you can go online, put the criteria and the attribute of your unit into our template, and it will give you a rent. And if you bring your program onto the unit, we'll honor that rent for 90 days. And usually we're pretty close to what the market is paying. Because the same way we determine what the rent is, someone pulls that data and determine what the rent is. It's not a computer generated. Someone is actually doing the mathematics to determine what that rent would be. We have a landlord owner portal. As I said, you can go through and do any and everything you need to do through our landlord inspection processes. And we have what we call a property protection program. And this is where if a participant destroys a unit, we will reimburse the property owner up to $2,000 for any destruction. But the thing that we found is less than 1% of our whole budget is we've paid out towards property protection programs. So families do not destroy units, contrary to what many may think. We pay out very low reimbursements for this program. And that is my presentation. I will bring up Dee Beatty, unless someone has questions, unless you want to bring me back.
We'll ask questions at the end of the presentation.
Okay.
And we'll get back with you. I definitely have a few. I really appreciate the presentation. We'll do it at the end of the Atlanta housing portion together.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dee Beatty. I'm the Deputy Chief Real Estate Officer for Operations, and I want to thank the council members for allowing us this opportunity to talk about the Home Flex program. So the Home Flex program is the Atlanta Housing's project-based rental assistance program. This program is also funded through HUD's Section 8 program. However, unlike the tenant-based voucher program, which my colleague just spoke about, the rental assistance remains with the unit or at the property. It isn't mobile and it doesn't move when the resident moves. Properties typically are brought onto our Home Flex program through applications or proposals that are submitted in response to an open solicitation, whether that's a notice of funding availability or NOFA, or a request for proposal or an RFP. Under this program, we partner with private owners and developers who have agreed to set aside a portion of their units to be rented out to low-income families. On a standard HomeFlex property, we can assist up to 50% of the total units at the property, but there are some property types, such as an elderly property or a Haven supportive housing property, where we can assist 100% of those units. The HomeFlex agreement terms that we enter into with these partners can range from 2 years up to 10 years, with renewable options at the end of the terms. And just to talk a little bit about the Haven HomeFlex properties, again, these are the supportive housing properties. The owner here is not only agreeing to set aside a portion of their units at the property, usually it's 100% of the units, but they're also agreeing to enter into a service agreement contract with a service provider that will provide wraparound services for those tenants that's residing at those properties. So that's our Haven program. Just to give you a little insight onto our portfolio for HomeFlex, there are currently 75 properties in our HomeFlex portfolio. We have a total of 6,366 affordable units under that program. There's a total of 8,345 individuals that's been housed at these properties as of yesterday. This includes the head of household and any dependents that they have living in the unit. We are currently partnering with 29 different private owners and developers under our HomeFlex program. The HomeFlex program rent. The contract rents are set at 60% of AMI for properties that are financed with low-income housing tax credit. The HomeFlex contract rent on properties financed without any tax credits can be set at the comparable market rate for that area. And as Tracy indicated, our residents pay no more than 30% of their adjusted gross income in tenant rent. And AH pays the difference between whatever the tenant rent is and the contract rent that we have established for the unit. For instance, if we have a contract rent for a one-bedroom that's at $750, and we determine that the tenant rent is $125, that leaves a difference of $625 that AH makes up that difference and pays that to the owner on behalf of that tenant, so that the owner can get the full contract rent of $750. Also on this program, owners are eligible to get an annual rent increase upon rent request to AH. Just to talk a little bit about the owner responsibilities and AH's responsibilities. Because it's a HomeFlex program, these are typically properties we do not own or manage. We're essentially just providing the rental assistance for the residents that's living at the properties. So the manager or the agent, the owner or the management agent manages the day-to-day property operations. They create and administer the site-based waiting list. They determine the resident program eligibility, conducts background checks such as criminal, credit, and rental history. They maintain the property in decent, safe, and sanitary condition, processing work orders and addressing capital needs as needed. They also enforce the tenant leases, and they resolve resident issues timely and appropriately. And then when we're looking at AH responsibility, we make the rental assistance to the owner on the first of every month. We process rent increase requests that the owner may submit, and we also process the renewal of these agreements. We conduct annual HomeFlex inspections. My colleague Tracy Jones just spoke about that. And these inspections include looking at the units, the common areas, and the building exteriors. We also monitor the financial, operational, and compliance performance of the properties. From a financial standpoint, we're looking at the monthly audited, unaudited financials, looking at the audited financials to make sure that the property is being financially viable, able to break even, able to service debt service. From a operational standpoint, we're looking at rent rolls, making sure properties are being maintained at the highest occupancy levels. And then from a compliance standpoint, we're conducting, we conduct annual tenant file audits where we go out, pull a sample of the files to make sure that the Files are being maintained in accordance with HUD regs, AH policies and procedures. Proper notifications are being given to residents. We also assist with addressing resident concerns. There are some times where a resident may have tried to work through management to get things done, and if they're not getting anywhere, sometimes they'll contact us, and then it's our job to get with the owners to make sure that those residents' concerns are being addressed and that they're being addressed timely. And then finally, we also facilitate regular trainings for our partners. For new hires that they bring on, we educate them on our program and what's expected of them. But just throughout the year, we do compliance training on different areas. That concludes my presentation, and I guess we'll take any questions anyone may have at this time.
Yeah, I have a few, and I'm sure my colleague, Councilmember Boxcar, will have a few as well. My first couple questions will be related to the Home Flex program. One of the things that I've noticed as a newly minted Invest Atlanta board member is that when programs have deep affordability, usually in that 30 to 50% range, usually HomeFlex is part of that calculation, and that stacking with the existing Atlanta affordability subsidies allows for that deeper affordability. And so I guess my question is, what is the limitation on getting more properties involved with the program? If there's any concerns or challenges that have been expressed by potential property owners about why they wouldn't want to participate, but recognizing that those sorts of deeper affordability opportunities exist by leveraging this program, I would imagine that there's a desire to get this to be as broad and as wide across the city as possible. So I'm just curious kind of where you're running into roadblocks and getting buy-in from the private sector.
We have we have a high level of buy-in for the Home Flex program. I would say the only complaint that we've heard recently from people, private sector, would be the rents that we're setting on our Home Flex program. As I mentioned, our rents, if there's a tax credit financing involved, we're limiting it to 60%. And that's different, and a lot of partners would like to have more as far as what the market supports. And so that's something that we're having to manage internally, because if we're entering into long-term agreements, we have to be able to financially sustain it as an agency to continue it for 20, 30 years or however. So that is the only complaint that I'm aware of, would be the rents that we're paying for our Home Flex.
Okay, and then let's say, folks are at home watching this presentation, watching this work session, and they say, hey, I want to get involved with this program, and your demand for the use of this program and partnerships increases 500-fold. Is there a limitation on how much federal funding we're receiving to support the program that we have to take into consideration, or is that not really an issue right now?
Well, with federal dollars, there's always some type of limitation. I can't say exactly what that limitation is, but it's not an endless fund of flow. We have to manage the dollars that we do get, and there's no guarantee that we're going to continue to get the level that we've always gotten. So we just can't say it's unlimited.
Yeah, and I guess with that in consideration, what kind of evaluation criteria are you using as you're looking at potential new properties to partner with? I know in working with Housing Justice League and other organizations, I know landlords differ dramatically in terms of quality, the amount of work they're putting in to ensure that their clients or their tenants have good quality of life, and I know that the inspection process is part of the enforcement aspect, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. But I'm curious what your evaluation criteria is for.
Well, whenever we're looking.
I lost you, it seems like. One second. And I see it's a wireless mic, so I wonder if it's a battery thing. I'll let you marinate on that question for a couple more minutes. And one thing I'll just say, just based on how the format of today's meeting is, we do have 2 more presenters after Atlanta Housing, and so I also want to hear from the group and the public with your thoughts. So what we'll do is, after we get through our presentations, myself and Councilman Bakhtiari will ask our questions. There is a portion set aside for public comment. I know a few people have signed up front. We'll do that. And then after that public comment, what we'll do is we'll open the floor to ask questions of any of our panelists and kind of try to keep it as open as possible. But we're going to make some adjustments to the agenda, just recognizing that I see a lot of folks who have been in the weeds on this work for a long time and want to make sure your voices can get heard. So, but we'll get this microphone situation fixed first.
Can you hear me?
I can. The bigger issue is that for the folks at home, it needs to capture your audio.
Hello? All right, that's better. So you was asking, what do we look for in evaluating partners?
Correct.
I'll say the first thing we're definitely looking for to partner with partners that are like-minded, with the mission in mind of helping low-income families and having the affordability component in their portfolio. We're looking to make sure that partners financially are sound enough that, we partner with them, that the property will be able to be maintained and be financially feasible long-term. We don't want to get into a situation where a partner cannot continue to operate, and then we got situations where residents may have to be moved. So we're looking at their financial stability. But we're also looking to make sure that they're having the right management company that can manage the process of bringing on tenants, managing the wait list, determining eligibility. And then we also look for partners that say they want to, if they're wanting to provide services in addition to allowing rental space there, but adding services to help residents be successful. Those are some of the things that we look for when we're looking for partners. And right now, I will say there's 2. We have a choice NOFA out on the street. It's targeted for landlords that have properties in the Vine City, Ashview Heights area. So that's one way where if someone is interested in partnering with us, they can submit an application through that open solicitation. And we're also working with Partners for Home, Invest Atlanta, Fulton County Behavioral Health. We're all part of the Permanent Supportive Housing NOFA that's currently open. So that's another way for anyone that's interested to start partnering with us through the Home Flex program. You would have to submit through those open solicitations.
Thank you so much. Councilman Baker, do you have a question about Home Flex?
Yeah, a couple. So thank you. When you say that you're working with Partners for Home and Continuum of Care, could you elaborate on what that looks like?
It's a joint memorandum of understanding. It's like a NOFA, a solicitation for partners that have projects that they want to bring on for Home Flex, but also they could get capital dollars as well as supportive services through these different agencies. So it's a joint solicitation that we've had to bring on permanent supportive housing.
So just to understand, they would be able to expand, they're the liaison to all the continuum of care partners, so people that are like in-town collaborative ministries or Gateway or any of these other entities that are looking for this type of, these vouchers for people that they are housing, they would have to come through PFH on behalf of continuum of care.
They would have to submit an application through that open solicitation, and then there's an evaluation committee of every project that goes through, and if it's approved by all those different entities, then we move forward.
Got it. And as of right now, do we know how much funding is available specifically for continuum of care?
I do not.
Okay. And I wanted to ask, how do people find out about this program? What does outreach look like? Is there a budget within Atlanta Housing for that type of advertising to make this more available to the public?
Well, you can go to the Atlanta Housing website, and it tells us what solicitations are currently open, if that answers your question.
I think, and I was thinking more of, I'm thinking more of people who are seniors. I'm thinking of individuals who may not have access, who may not have the ability to navigate the website, who might not be able to reach it that way. If there was outreach to meet people where they are, or if that was something, in fact, maybe perhaps that Counsel could assist with. I think one of the things that we're finding time and time again with resources, and this is not a reflection on you all, this is just a general issue that we have, is that with our most under-resourced communities, finding ways to meet them where they are. The work you already do, I have no doubt that you have people waiting lists miles and miles long.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what council can do or what the administration can do to provide the resources needed to assist with amplifying these resources. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I don't have an answer for you right now, but maybe there's some, we could talk a little further after.
Absolutely.
This so I can get a better understanding.
Yeah.
Dr. Grant is saying, yes, we need your help when we need to talk.
Oh, you mean you don't have it all sorted out already? We haven't gotten this all figured out? No, I'm more than happy to meet and talk. That's not a problem at all. And I was also wondering, when you're saying partners that are like-minded, do you all sometimes work with actual building owners that are like a Section 8 housing situation or things of that nature?
We don't do individual single family on the home flex. Is that
No, more like apartment complexes or Section 8, like more denser complexes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, a lot of our partners are big apartment complex owners.
Okay.
Is that what you're
Yes,
asking?
and so my question was, if we have a situation, I have a situation where I have a couple of what are supposed to be affordable complexes in my district where the property owners are not taking care of their renters or they aren't keeping the building up to code. And so I'm wondering if there is anything that, is there a way that AHA works to, and how does it look if those issues come to the attention of the organization?
Now, if it's a home flex property that we have, we do an annual inspection through our housing choice team. And if there are failing inspections, then we, of course, notify the owner. You give them a cure period, a time to address the issues, and then we go back out. And 9 times out of 10, whatever the issues are, they're resolved by the time we come back out. Now, if we have a habitual situation where owner is continuously not maintaining the property, failing inspections, there have been times where we ended the contract. We ended the agreement, and then, of course, relocated residents.
Okay, so the residents aren't just, they are relocated rather than just cutting off the relationship with the owners.
If that is the decision that this is not a partner we want to continue partnering with, we'll end the agreement, and then residents have to be relocated. We don't want them staying at a place where we don't want to continue to have an agreement on.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. And I did have some questions for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Just real quick, with regards to, you mentioned that you did 24,000 inspections per year, I believe it's.
Yes.
And with 19 inspectors.
Yes.
Is there a greater demand for need for inspectors than what y'all are providing, or are y'all doing at a rate that you think needs to be? And sorry, that was a weird question, but the way my framing is largely informed by conversations that I've had with folks in senior living centers or affordable housing units, or places where there's a lot of subsidies and that folks are getting vouchers from this program, but have had issues with property managers, have had issues with just different things that could use some additional support from an enforcement entity that's monitoring that. And I don't know if there's if they're getting inspected with the frequency that they should, or if they're I'm just kind of curious what your capacity is for more inspections or for greater due diligence on that front. Kind of just based on your manpower, are y'all looking to continue to grow to ensure that? I know as a city we have goals centered around getting more housing units online, getting more people into housing, but I do get concerned about the quality of the housing that people have and whether that quality can be maintained and how it's maintained. If you could talk through that a little bit more, I would appreciate that.
Absolutely. Great question. So we conduct annual inspections. When the family come onto the program, we do an initial inspection, make sure the unit is meeting our standards. Then we do an annual inspection. But at any time between the initial and the annual, the family can call into our contact center and say, hey, I have an issue in my unit. We then schedule what we call a special inspection. And so we go out and inspect that issue, that concern, and depending on the level of severity of the unit, we either give them 72 hours, 10 days, or 30 days to cure the process. If they do not cure it within those time frames, we then issue the family a new voucher to relocate from that unit. We do not allow our families to maintain. We try to communicate with the families to let us know immediately when there's an issue. So sometimes they do not call us right away, and when we finally get there, it is an expansive issue. But the reason why we only have 11, in the city of Atlanta, we only have 10,000 units on the program, but we do 24,000 inspections because we go out and we do those special inspections, and it doesn't matter how many times a family calls in. If they call in, we'll go out and do it. During COVID, we were doing virtual inspections, so we understand there is a heightened need for us to do more inspections. So we are returning to in-person inspections starting June 1. So we'll be going back out to see the physical unit, where in the past we were doing the virtuals due to COVID, but we did not have an opportunity to lay our eyes on these units. So virtually we were doing inspections with the iPhone or the template that we use. But we will do inspections as much as the family calls in. We also have quality assurance inspectors that goes behind to ensure that the inspections that we're doing are great, as well as they do the inspections, they do property evaluations. So before we even bring on a property, we'll do these evaluations, and then we'll go out once a quarter to just kind of randomly select the quality, to monitor the quality of certain units, even if someone doesn't call in, to ensure that they're meeting our enhanced inspection requirements.
Thank you. And I guess I'm curious too, what sort of education goes into working with your tenants, letting them know they have rights, and what the process or protocol would be if they have an issue. Is that something that they get a package when they are part of the program and they're informed of these things, or is there continual communication through the relationship that lets them know what opportunities they have to address or get their concerns addressed?
Yes, so we do a briefing, a voucher briefing. It lasts about 4 hours, and we go through the entire process. We give them a document, we give them a packet. When things change, we communicate to let them know, here's some differences, here's some things you need to do. We've recently implemented surveys where families can call us. We call them randomly and say, how's it going? So that we're trying to see how we can continue to educate our families. But we do briefings. Even if someone's on the program and they say, hey, I want to move, when they move, they have to go through another briefing. Even though the requirement says you only have to do one briefing one time once that family comes on, but we continue to do those interim briefings when a family decides in the middle that they want to relocate to another unit. So we're constantly educating our families, reminding them of processes that have been standard and new processes that they may not be aware of.
Thank you so much. I am curious too, how many, you might not have this data in front of you, so, and I know Atlanta Housing will be presenting before the next Community Development Human Services Committee, so information that you don't have now, that's fine, we'll extract it at the next meeting. But I'm curious, how many new families do you see applying for vouchers on a yearly basis? I imagine some of the families that you're working with have been in this system for some time. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious kind of what that intake load looks like, what the outtakes of families who are no longer in this, and I get there's different reasons why that might be the case, mm-hmm. but I'm curious how many families are exiting the system on a yearly basis. And also I'm curious about the demographic profile of some of these families that are entering and exiting the system. As we are looking as a city to figure out how to solve our housing challenges, I wonder how valuable that could be for our storytelling and understanding what's happening on the ground. I imagine many of the families that are applying for your programs don't always necessarily get a chance to stay in a community that they might have grown up in or have their kids might be in school in and things like that. And I'm curious what that migration looks like, whether it's internal to the city of Atlanta, if you're going from Buckhead to High Point, or I know many of your families don't live in a city anymore. So just from just an understanding of the situation, I wonder if the data that you have could be useful to that storytelling so that us as policymakers can look more deeply into how do we preserve communities. If we have a lot of families that are coming in and using your program and finding housing opportunities, what can we do to ensure that there's more opportunities within a community that they have grown up in? And separately, if we look at over time, a larger volume of new families using the program suggests some sickness or lack of health in the housing market because more people are using vouchers. And so what's going on there? So just I'm thinking out loud in a very public forum, but I just wonder if there's an opportunity to lean on the information that you do have to help us as policymakers do more so that we can preserve as much of who we are as a city, who we are as our communities, and don't lose that to the realities that housing only exists in certain communities and people have to move across town and move their kids across town. So that was me just thinking out loud, but if y'all have that information, we'd love to see, anonymized obviously, but see it and aggregate it in a way that we can do some evaluation of our policies to support more families.
Well, we do have that information. We do track our zip codes, and we do track how our families move around. I don't have the number to give you off the top of my head. We do have a waiting list, a very robust waiting list. We do our first pulls, when we pull in our families from this list, we require that our families meet a residency preference, a City of Atlanta residency preference, so that we are ensuring that we're housing our families that live in the city, that they can maintain residency in the community, and that they get the first access to the voucher, those families living within the city. So we have a residency preference. If a family doesn't meet that residency preference, we don't tell them they're denied. We put them back on the waiting list, hence our very robust waiting list. As far as families that move off the program or go to other communities, we have that data. We have some families that say, I'm doing better and I don't want the voucher. Some people buy homes. Other people just fall off the program, and we try to find out why, and there's no real reason. They just do something different. We do have that data. As far as how many people we move in, off the top of my head, we had been moving anywhere between 1,100 and 1,500 families in new every year until COVID hit. With the moratoriums and just people having to stay in place, it shut down the number of families that we could just process and get into a unit. So it slowed down our progression of how many families we house, and I think over the last 2 years, we're somewhere between 600 and 800 families, which is very low for us. We're looking next year to put some things in place to increase that momentum to add new families to the program.
And remind me again, how long is your wait list currently?
Well, we have about 24,000 families on the list.
Oh, wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other, Councilman Barker, did you have any other questions?
No, you addressed the majority of mine. I know that we want to get through the next two presentations so we can get to public comment.
Thank you so much.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate you.
You're welcome.
All right. Up next is the Office of Housing and Community Development. Good to see you, Josh.
Good to see you. Hi, I'm Josh Humphreys with the City's Office of Housing and Community Development. And folks on my team, Carolina Rodriguez and Wesley Meyer, are here as well, so pester them with questions afterwards or something. I put together a presentation, or our team did, about, I think there was a lot covered by Housing Justice League, and there's another presentation about some of the opportunities around tenants' rights and protections and what we can do as a city to address that. The other side of it, I think in our minds that's important to look at is just the overall housing market and the ways in which, when you mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that rents are going up precipitously in the market, and I think an important part of that is how do we stabilize the housing market in a way that doesn't create the kind of chaotic housing environment that in a state where there are limited tenant protections, it's more precarious for renters than it would be otherwise. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the data on that and some of the work that we're doing really to address housing supply and in the rental market, and specifically affordable housing in the city in the coming years. First thing I'll mention is a little bit about the population growth that we're seeing in the city. So Atlanta as a region has boomed over the last 50 years. The city's population has a bit of a different history to it due to white flight and suburbanization that happened in the second half of the 20th century. The city's population dropped. We lost about 100,000 residents, or a little over 100,000 residents from 1970 to 1990, had a somewhat stable population from 1990 to 2010, and then a real population boom post-2010. That's also around the same time that you've got, the recession happens in 2008, 2011, so you've got a lot of homes that were foreclosed on, a lot of middle-income black families in the city, particularly due to subprime lending that happened, so you've got a lot of vacancy that happens in the market, and then you've got a big population boom, so it creates a bit of a housing challenge. We expect that to continue to be quite a bit of a challenge. The Atlanta Regional Commission estimates somewhere around 800,000 residents will live in the city by 2050. So a significant increase, right? We just hit our all-time high as a city, and we're expected to continue growing. And that puts a lot of challenges on our housing market to keep up, to build enough housing for residents across the income spectrum in order to help stabilize the market. So this chart here, the pink is 2010, and the yellow is 2019, which is the most recent census data we have available for this. It's inflation adjusted, and you can see the breakdown of rental units by cost. And so it kind of goes from left to right. So the most expensive is on the far right side of the screen. See the big jump in the yellow with the arrows on the far side? That's where all the housing production that's happening in the city, or the large majority of the housing production in the city is happening. So even as we're growing, we are adding a lot of new housing, but the housing we're adding is not mirroring the broad needs of residents of the city. And so we're not creating housing that's under $1,000 a month, that's around $1,000 a month, and everywhere in between. And so we're seeing significant pressure across the housing market. 53% of Atlanta households are renters, which is much higher than the national average. 64% of black households in Atlanta rent, which is higher also than the national average. And the median income for renters was $43,000 compared to homeowners, which is over $100,000. So there's a real gap there. And the median gross rent has increased over 20% till 2019. As you mentioned, that the most recent numbers on that have gone up even more. About half of Atlanta renters are rent burdened. Almost half. 47% of renters in the city pay more than 30% of their income on housing. A significant portion of those are extremely cost burdened. This creates a situation really across the income spectrum where residents are just having to pay way too much for housing, and it's putting a lot of pressure on them to just be able to live in the city and live comfortably. And it's changing very rapidly in Atlanta. Households earning around $45,000 a year.
Sorry, real quick. Can you back up to the last slide? Does this include transportation costs?
No, it does not include transportation costs. If you're a household earning about $45,000 a year, you can 30% of your income is about $1,000 a month. 4 in 10 households in Atlanta earn $45,000 a year or less. We have a significant kind of wealth inequality, income inequality that we have in this city, where you have the more expensive units that I showed in the slide earlier. You've got a lot of residents that can afford those units, that are able to live in those units. The market is producing a lot of units at that price point. What we're not producing and not creating enough housing for are the 4 in 10 households in the city that need to pay $1,000 a month or less. Our office put together a report that came out last year called the Neighborhood Change Report. And this report tracks from 2010, basically the 2010s, economic change that happened across the city. And you'll see there's several different types of change that we're seeing in the city. One thing the main thing I want to note here, and the reason that we put it in the presentation, is that the change that's happening in the city is it's not monolithic, right? Change is happening in different neighborhoods in different ways. There are areas of the city that have continued to see population decline of all income levels. There are areas of the city that have seen population decline of their higher income levels, but an increase in population in their lower income levels. There's areas of the city that we've seen, and then that's the blue on the chart, where we've seen increase in populations across income levels. And then the map is mostly in yellow of any of the colors, that's the areas where we're seeing low-income displacement, where there's an increase in residents at higher income levels and a decrease in residents in lower income levels. And that we did an update year over year, saw an increase in that particular chart, portion of the chart. There are areas of the city where displacement is actively happening, and we're tracking it. And then there are opportunities, I think, that for us to minimize the pressures in those neighborhoods, but also areas of the city where that type of displacement pressure isn't happening in quite the same way, where we have an opportunity, I think, to create the kinds of housing, the kind of stable neighborhoods that can ward off much of the displacement pressures that we expect to continue seeing with a city that's growing in population so rapidly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing right now, and then the work under the Dickens administration to address housing affordability and creating as much housing as we can to really kind of push the engine as much as possible to build housing in the city so that we can help stabilize the market. And there's put an ambitious goal to build or preserve 20,000 affordable housing units over the next 8 years. One key element that we're working on related to this is to build on public land. There is a lot of publicly owned land that's vacant and around the city. The picture here is 104 Trinity. If you parked in the deck or came in from the Trinity side, there's a grassy lot across the street from City Hall. We've selected a developer that we're working with right now to build 222 units. 180 or so of those are going to be affordable. It's going to include supportive housing units likely as well. We're working to put all of those pieces together right now. But that's the kind of project we want to do all over the city, to develop housing, to take underutilized assets that the city has and other public agencies have, and collectively move that forward. A couple weeks ago, the mayor launched a housing strike force, and that strike force pulled together all of the public agencies across the city. So Atlanta Housing was there, Invest Atlanta was there, Beltline was there, public school system, MARTA, all together, and the Land Bank Authority, about how we can leverage our collective tools, assets, and particularly our land to build as much housing as possible in the next few years. So when you think about what that looks like, we want to prioritize projects based on our shared goals and jointly identify the needs and challenges to that development so that collectively across all the tools that we have as public entities, that we can coordinate the planning and the funding and the infrastructure to build out really the broad needs of a neighborhood. We talk a lot about housing, but housing is connected to neighborhoods and where people live and where they access fresh food or don't, or where they have access to good quality schools or health care or transit access that's affordable and easy to access jobs and other basic amenities. So we think that coordinating across these entities, we can do something really interesting. At the Strike Force kickoff, we talked about the idea of bringing together kind of a portfolio management type approach to look at the full breadth of public assets, and how can we coordinate across that in the areas of the city where there's a confluence of public land. Oftentimes, if you ever look at a public ownership map and nerd out like we like to do in our office, you'll notice there's a lot of land that one will be owned by the school system here, and then another one is by the city here, and then you got all of these different owners that are right next to each other, and oftentimes contributing to vacant, underutilized land in neighborhoods that desperately need resources, desperately need housing. So if we look together and with the collective support of this strike force and with a team that's there to act on that, to get the land in place, the entitlements and the zoning and the permitting, all that work that needs to happen in order to make it possible, and then package it together and work to get the kinds of amenities, the kinds of housing that we know we need in the city, we think that we can do something really special. This is a quick overview of some of the parcels of land in the city that we've identified that we think might be viable for housing development. Now there's further QA that has to be done here. Some of these sites, like Bowen Homes and others, have active work that are being done on them, or 104 Trinity that I mentioned. And there are others that are sitting there that we think that have a real opportunity to be leveraged, but we haven't fully leveraged yet. We break these down in our minds in a few different categories. The first is the ready-to-build type. So 104 Trinity that I've mentioned is one of those categories, right? You've got a vacant piece of land. It's not being used by anything. The infrastructure is already there. It's an infill lot in the city. We want to move on those as quickly and as rapidly as possible to get shovels in the ground and get housing built in those areas. The next category, and this is really where that kind of portfolio manager idea and the collaboration is most important, is these large-scale catalytic sites. And I'll talk a little bit more about Thomasville in a second, but you can't really see on the presentation. But there's in Thomasville Heights, there's 120 acres of publicly owned land, almost all of it vacant right now. And this surrounds the Forest Cove residence and then the Forest Cove apartment building. And so as we look about areas of the city where there is this confluence of public land and the need for collaboration to do something that really supports a thriving, equitable, mixed-income community where we have the schools and the food access and the housing that we need, these are the areas that we think the city could have kind of a net impact with our partners. And the third area that I'll mention is there are some parcels in the city that, or public entities own, that are just worth a lot of money, but they're sitting and being underutilized in many ways. And for those, we're looking at ways that we could do revenue generation in a way that could help fund things like the Housing Trust Fund and create a cash flow for the city to help pay for the various needs that we have, whether it's to build sidewalks or to build housing and the needs the city will have, to really get the most out of these properties while also making sure that we build the housing and other resources we need. Another initiative I'll talk a bit about is our faith-based housing initiative. So the mayor earlier this year launched a faith-based housing initiative to work with faith communities across the city. There's a lot of, speaking of vacant land, there's a lot of faith institutions that own parking lots or parcels that are vacant, underutilized in the city. And so the mayor called on the faith community to come together and work alongside city partners to help build housing on that land. And we've had a really robust response. This was a picture from the kickoff. We've had probably about 200 people there. We've had 3 technical workshops, maybe 2, I think it's 2. We got a third one coming. We've had 75 to 100 faith leaders in the room each time we've done that, and we're meeting one-on-one, providing technical assistance and support. We talked earlier today with some partners about how we might continue to provide visioning and support and help these faith leaders come together and find the resources they need to actually make housing possible and contribute to the mayor's stated goal of 10% or a tithe of their land to our 20,000 unit goal. This is a picture of, or a rendering of Atlanta First United Methodist Church. And I think it went before the Invest Atlanta board last week for a vote for tax-exempt bonds. This is at the corner of Ralph McGill, or Ivan Allen there, and Peachtree Street downtown. The church has owned parking down there for a long time. It's been underutilized, and they came together under the leadership of Pastor Jasmine Smothers of the church there, are going to build really, I think, an ambitious project, but affordable housing right in the city's core. I mentioned Thomasville a bit briefly. A few things I want to mention about Thomasville. One is you may be aware of Forest Cove and the real kind of humanitarian crisis that's occurring with the residents that live there right now. Living conditions are quite terrible. And when the mayor took office in the beginning of this year, he stepped in and said, I'm going to make it my problem. We're going to go down and figure out how we can support the residents that live in Forest Cove. And so we've been partnering with Open Doors and AVLF and Community Foundation and a bevy of other partners. APD Urban is the organization on the ground. We've all come together. Really marshaled, the mayor was able to marshal kind of a group that's been working for a long time in that area, and now really with the goal of moving residents out and giving them a safe and quality housing in the city. And so that is actively moving. The mayor, we're donating $9.1 million to facilitate that, and that we're hoping to very soon have our first residents relocate. But there's another story, and I go back to the 120 acres about Thomasville Heights. But because Forest Cove is closing, the school across the street, the elementary school, which is a purpose-built school, is also going to have to close. And that's because the majority of the students were residents of Forest Cove. We realized what was going to happen to the school and looked around at the potential land that could be leveraged. We started asking ourselves the question, what if we collectively across public entities built the kinds of things that a healthy neighborhood needs on our public land to ensure that there's not a forest cove that closes, that causes the elementary school to close again in this neighborhood in the future. And so we are working together we just kicked off the planning process, and all the different public partners are at the table to ensure that what happens in the future of Thomasville is not dependent on Forest Cove, but we'll have good quality housing, transportation access, and other key amenities in the neighborhood. And we think that this is a model with the housing strike force that we can pursue in other neighborhoods around the city as well. I also mentioned the work we're doing really to use the funds that we have available and the new funds that are coming. One is the Housing Trust Fund. So at the end of last year, funds as part of the Community Benefits Agreement with CIM and the Gulch deal put a first $20 million or so into that fund, $21 million, and we've committed an additional $7 million from the general fund this year to get things started. What we're really focused on with that is not to set a big piggy bank where we talk about how much money we have in it, but to use it and to actively use it for key projects that advance housing affordability and housing stability in the city. We're also working right now to identify long-term recurring revenue sources. We know that getting kind of a one-off money to start it off and even just the general fund allocation is not enough to address the broad housing needs and the way you use that. So we're working to find more funding that we can bolster this and capitalize the fund. There's a whole array of other programs and projects that exist. You know, we've got housing bond funds that are available that we are working to get out the door as quickly as possible. There's CDBG and Home, and Invest Atlanta has a whole slew of programs to help finance affordable housing. Earlier this year, City Council passed an update to the Urban Enterprise Zone program, which we think everything from ADUs up to large multifamily and preservation can be a tax abatement tool to really leverage for housing affordability in the city. And there are other programs like Inclusionary Zoning. This is the map of the city's 3 Inclusionary Zoning districts right here that help to ensure that as new development does happen in certain areas of the city, that it includes some long-term affordability in that. So with that, I will stop and we'll take any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Josh. A few questions. The first one, I really appreciate the mayor's 20,000 affordable units goal. One of the things I haven't really been sure on is that net affordable housing or is that gross affordable housing? So, because I know we're losing units on a yearly basis.
Yeah, I think the goal is to create and preserve, right? We understand that a lot of it, because of there's a lot of naturally occurring affordability in the city. Well, there's less every day. Mm-hmm. And so preserving that and looking at tools that we can use to preserve that. So something like the Urban Enterprise Zone program, we structured it in a way that now you can add so there's bringing subsidy into a project helps to ensure that type of affordability. So looking at the preservation of units that do exist as well as the creation of new, because if we're just creating new units and not preserving the ones that we do have that are still in the city, then we're fighting a losing battle at the end of the day.
Yeah, and part of that too, I recognize, is that a lot of the subsidies we're providing for affordable housing, whether it's through ABI, whether it's through Invest Atlanta, those affordability periods expire at a certain point. Right, yeah. 15 years, 10 years. There's opportunities for renewals. I know a lot of those definitions or requirements are defined by the state. And so one is the city or the administration looking at where those affordability periods are ending and where the city can provide some additional support to stabilize what's happening there. And two, not to get ahead of myself, I know at some point this year the administration will be determining a legislative package to go before the state to try to get some policy change at the state level. Would this be something that the administration would be looking at or considering to address that?
Yeah, I think that, we talked a lot about it earlier on the call, or in the meeting. I keep saying call. I'll get out of that with post-COVID at some point. But there are obviously state laws that limit some of the work that we can do, whether it's the length of affordability or just some basic tenants' rights related stuff where Georgia is weaker than other states. So I think working through what those might look like and what type, of broad state coalition will be important. That's an important part of the housing conversation. To the question of, or kind of the point you raised around the length of affordability, I think that's kind of a real challenge, right? And even if there wasn't a cap on it, there's a certain kind of market economics element of the work too, of like how much subsidy and the length of affordability. I think that the work we're doing on public land is a way to address that in some sense, because we want to focus on the areas that we can maintain public ownership. I use the one at Fort Trinity example. The city is planning to do a ground lease on that property rather than a disposition. And because we're doing a ground lease, then we'll have long-term control, and the agreement is for long-term permanent affordability on the site rather than something that burns off after 15, 20 years or even 10 years in some cases. So I think that leveraging our public land as a way to do that will be important. It doesn't fix everything, but I think that's a unique tool that we have, that when you own the land, you can work around the limitations we have on length of affordability.
Thank you. And just with regards to the public land piece, you had mentioned this concept of a public land portfolio manager.
Yeah.
Would that be the land bank, or would this be a new entity that would have that role within the city?
So the Strike Force met for its first time, 2 weeks ago now, and we're working through exactly where that would live, what exactly it would look like. For us, it was important to get buy-in across the public entities. They're like, let's do this together and let's collaborate. And so we're working through exactly what that will look like, how that will be structured. But there is broad buy-in for us to do that type of work, especially in areas like Thomasville, where it's much needed for us to coordinate.
Yeah, and that piece is particularly interesting to me. I'm biased. I live in Mechanicsville, and we have a lot of publicly owned land in the neighborhoods. I'm curious. I would love to see that map again. If you could shoot that to me in an email, I'll check back to what was sent before as far as where the administration is focusing on those efforts. But I mean, we got 2 huge parking lots that are owned by the Fulton County Recreation Authority that wasn't part of the Turner Field package, and it would be nice to get some affordable housing, some permanently affordable housing, considering that it's publicly owned land in the heart of the city, and I don't know, it seems like such a missed opportunity. Parking for jury duty for Fulton County doesn't seem like the highest and best use, and so we'd love to the administration and the Department of Planning support on even getting that transformed. Really a great opportunity to move that issue forward in communities that really need the help.
Yeah, and we'd love to meet with you and talk about the specific sites and anything else in your district. That's a static map that's in there. We also have an interactive one, so we can talk about specific parcels and how it all kind of fits together in our work to do this.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any more questions, but I know my colleague, Councilmember Bakhtiari, might have a few.
Hey, Mr. Humphreys, long time no see. That's a joke. I see him every day. So what is the current deficit we're building at, housing in general?
So I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I can get them to you. The short of it is we didn't build enough housing units in the last decade to meet the households that moved to the city by a decent amount. Some of that was offset because we had some higher vacancy due to the recession, so that helped a bit. But toward the end of the decade, the deficit in housing supply became more of an issue because the vacancy that was available earlier in the decade had dried up, and so there's a real gap. I mean, I think one of the things to remember on the housing supply thing is that for about 3 years we didn't build any housing, and right prior to that was when kind of the period of time that was happening where the housing authority was removing a lot of the housing stock that they had, and so there's kind of that, and then you mix the recession in the middle of it. It just created a situation where we didn't build housing like we normally would have, so we were already at a deficit at the beginning of the decade.
Right, and I think our numbers were around 20,000 deficit, but I know that we're also built in slow, so we've built since the 90s, and I think we're less populated than we were in the 50s. And looking at your numbers, we're about where we were in 1970.
Yeah, that's right.
So the idea that Atlanta is full comes from what? The overbuilding of single-family homes taking over lots?
I mean, I think that we made decisions as a city when we were shrinking, right, that made sense for the city at the time, right? And so we built the city to kind of like in a way that modeled after a lot of the suburbs that we have. The city is growing now, and so I think we have to think about how that growth happens and how do we make space for people. We've never been this big before as a city, right? And so thinking about how do we make space for that is is something I think that we're going to have to deal with over the next few years. And part of that for us is, there's a lot of land in the city that's just vacant, right? So building on that, but also just generally, how do we as a city think about, I think growth has an opportunity to have a net positive, right? Part of the reason that Forest Cove closed the school across the street because there wasn't enough housing stock around it to bolster the neighborhood.
Right. And
so when there's not enough housing in a neighborhood, you don't have the schools and the grocery stores and stuff you need. So there's a lot of benefits to filling in where we don't have housing.
So are we still looking at about 63% of the city zoned for single family?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Okay. And then, I suppose my other piece is, what's stopping us from requiring a greater percentage of affordable housing being built? Right now we're at, what, 10%?
You're talking about for inclusionary zoning or
Correct.
affordability subsidies?
Yeah, well, yes. It's all the above.
Well, I would kind of separate the two of them out. There's like subsidy in my mind, and that's where, whether it's a tax abatement or a loan from invested land or otherwise, at that point there's money in the deal, right? You're paying for the delta essentially in the rental unit. If it's going to be $1,500 otherwise, that subsidy is making it $1,200, and it's in the deal to do that. I think looking at that, there's always the question of how far can that subsidy go from a number of years, like Councilmember Dozier was mentioning, or for a depth of affordability, like how, do you want a 30% median income or 50% median income, or if you did like an 80 or 100%, maybe you could get more units that way, but your subsidy is lower. So I think there's a lot of calculations as far as how do you do that, but you need subsidy in order to kind of figure that out from a market economic standpoint. The other side is the inclusionary zoning type side, where like we have around the Beltline, the map I showed earlier. Yeah, this map here. These are areas of the city that are near major public investment. So the city enacted inclusionary zoning. One's around the Beltline. This is the West Side Quarry Park, and then the purple magenta color is by the stadium. These areas have an affordability requirement in them. As a kind of a result of the city invested a lot of money in these areas through major public investment like the Beltline or the Quarry Park, and impacted the housing affordability really as a kind of a market impact because of the major investment. Inclusionary zoning, I think there can be a robust conversation about the set-asides, but it's designed in many ways as a tool that's not subsidy. So there's the component of like if you're requiring affordability, to do so in a way that understands market realities of the cost of construction and the cost of the units. And so I think that it's a little bit different than the subsidy. In the subsidy conversation, you can have a conversation about adding more subsidy to get more affordability in a project. But the way inclusionary zoning is set up, it's not set up as a subsidy tool as such.
I think one of the concerns and one of the fears was that if we were to push for greater subsidies and for greater affordability requirements, that we do have another development authority within the city that we have to worry about giving out larger breaks.
Sure.
And so wondering how we sidestep that as a city.
So there is an ordinance that was passed around the same time inclusionary zoning was passed. We call it the Public Subsidies Ordinance, but it does control the minimum affordability thresholds that development authorities or public entities, including the city, can give out. So it's and that one currently is set as the same as what the inclusionary zoning is. So it's 10% at 60% median income or 15% at 80% median income is what that mandates, and that is a city ordinance that was passed by City Council 5-ish years ago now.
Okay.
And that is the mechanism for, like thinking through, like if there is a minimum set aside the City Council wants, I think there is where you can look at. But I do think it's important to work with the folks that are providing subsidy and the development community to understand kind of what's realistic, what can you ask and what can't, because you don't want to shut down development, but you want to get as much affordability as possible. And so I think it's always balancing those two in the conversation.
And then looking at something like potentially, and I want legal to prefacing this with legal not having an aneurysm when I bring this up, but looking at potentially bringing back something like stormwater fees or to tax impermeable surfaces to create additional funds and revenue for additional affordable housing, but also to push for there to be, quite frankly, less concrete being poured or finding a way to push for parking lots to be used as something other than parking lots, given the development rights that they have.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of complexity to that one, but I think the basic question is what kind of city do we want to have, right? And how do we work across the different levers that the city has, funding and regulatory and the like, to see development where we want to see development, and less development where we don't want to see development. So in those kind of situations, I mean, stormwater is one, I think, to look at and consider how that may or may not work with that. But I think there's a whole bunch of tools in that toolbox that the city has at its disposal that are worth exploring.
And
Real quick, I do want to acknowledge that we are at 3 o'clock. However, I spoke with the staff and they're willing to indulge me. We'll keep rocking and rolling. I know we're past the 3 o'clock mark, but we'll continue with the
we'll
meeting.
keep doing what?
We'll keep rocking and rolling.
Sounds good. And this last question I have, actually, Zach, I think you can speak more to it, around senior transferring properties into land banks or into... Maybe you can kind of speak to my question since we talked about it yesterday. I'm pulling in an audience member for my next question. Do you think you can step up there real quick and ask the question for me, since you're going to word it way better than I can?
We actually spoke yesterday as well, so good to see you again. The question is regarding seniors who, you could say in a sense are prisoners for their homes, and if there's any program, or just tenant-occupied properties in general, seniors who are renters. The Housing Justice League presented a case of that in DeKalb County earlier. Opportunities to transfer those types of properties into preservation efforts or initiatives, land trusts, et cetera. Thanks.
Yeah, one sec. We do have, and I think what's been mentioned a couple times today, the Atlanta Land Trust is a nonprofit in the city that works to create permanent for-sale affordability through a process where they keep long-time ownership of the land, but property owners can buy into kind of the ownership of the house itself and still be an owner, but it keeps long-term, they have long-term control. So a lot of the challenges we have around rent control and otherwise that you mentioned, this allows for wealth creation, but limits the kind of increase over time so that it doesn't become unaffordable for the next person who wants. Amanda Ryan, who runs the Atlanta Land Trust, and I have talked a little bit about this, and I encourage you, Councilmember or Zach, to chat with her more about it. I think there is opportunity, and there's some other cities. Wesley and our team has done some exploration on this that have done kind of an entrust your home type program, where if you'd like, you don't have an heir that you plan to give the home to, you could work with the land trust to say, hey, after I'll entrust my home to the land trust, and then the land trust then takes on ownership and some of the maintenance and other challenges that you may have kind of as a homeowner. And then after that person passes, then it would go into the land trust, and they would find an affordable person that could then buy the home. So there are programs like that. I think there's openness to it. Would love to explore that with y'all in any way that we can be helpful. But entities like the Atlanta Land Trust are probably the most natural home for that to live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
So we'll go to our next presentation, Atlanta Legal Aid.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm the only one who didn't prepare a presentation because I wanted to really get into some nitty-gritty ideas. So just as a sort of opener, my name is Lindsay Siegel. I'm the Director of Housing Advocacy at Atlanta Legal Aid. We're a nonprofit that provides free civil legal services to people who couldn't otherwise afford an attorney. And we have offices that cover the 5-county metro area, and we assist in a variety of legal issues, rental housing just being one of them. So my colleagues have really all explained the issue, so I'm not going to go back over that because you all already know the issue. That's why you had us here today. But, the affordable crisis obviously has reached new heights. I work directly with tenants, and I do that every single day. And in the past 2 years alone, I've personally spoken to and represented hundreds of tenants who have been affected by this issue. So today, I chose to focus on 4 areas of concern where I think the City Council actually has the opportunity to act. So I'm going to get into some nitty-gritty ideas. The 4, just as an overview, first is hidden fees in tenants' leases and the deceptive way that they make rents unaffordable for tenants. 2, some gaps in the city's security deposit alternative ordinance that actually allows companies to take advantage of tenants. 3, the near impossibility of tenants trying to rent with Section 8 vouchers, and one way to address it. And 4, code enforcement, and how code enforcement reports can be a powerful tool to tenants proving that they have conditions claims against landlords who refuse to make repairs. So to talk about the first issue, hidden fees in tenants' leases. This is really an issue that it hasn't really always existed to the extent we've seen it in the last 2 years. I think it's been exacerbated by private equity landlords coming in and purchasing multifamily rentals and trying to get as much of a profit as possible. And it's not an issue that's inherent to rental housing. Landlords don't need it to make money, and it's a big problem. So to illustrate that problem, I'm just going to give you an example of a tenant of mine whose lease I looked at just this morning. So this tenant is obligated to pay $1,570 in rent. So already she's paying a lot of rent. On top of that, she pays a $75 monthly renter's insurance fee. She pays a $10 pest fee, a $10 trash removal fee, $25 valet trash fee, $70 water and sewer fee, $99 technology package fee, $5 package locker fee, and a $9 rent plus credit reporting fee. You put all those together and it equals over $300 in extra fees on top of the $1,570 that she already thought she was going to pay. She also paid $525 in application fees just to have the opportunity to see the lease that would contain all these extra fees. And once she was approved, she paid a $200 approval fee before she even had to pay her first month's rent. So what this meant for this tenant, and a lot of tenants like her, is that she applied probably online. She paid a bunch of money that she probably couldn't afford for this place, and then the landlord approved her, and then they came back and said, great, now sign our lease, and it's a 65-page lease, and we'll have the main rent, the $1,570 that you thought you were paying on the first page of the lease, and all these other fees are going to be hidden on pages 49 through 64. And she didn't know that she was going to be obligated to do that. She could have just walked away and refused to sign that lease, but she was already down $525. And how many people have that money to give to another landlord over and over and over? So then she was stuck. And not surprisingly, she came to us because she couldn't afford her rent and had to apply for rental assistance. This is a problem that we're seeing more and more. The thing that the City Council can do about it is pass an ordinance saying that, you know, even though we can't control rents in this state right now, though I hope Housing Justice League does something about that, we can't control rents through rent stability or rent control, but we can control what tenants are, what's disclosed to tenants about how much they're going to pay, so that it's not hidden and they know up front. And I'll just say, because I think I forgot to mention this, all those fees that I mentioned, those are mandatory fees. So she had to do the valet trash, whatever that is. She had to buy a technology package, et cetera. So these are mandatory fees that people are getting tricked into committing to. And it's causing a problem. And it means that tenants are more and more going to landlord-tenant court and being evicted because they can't pay these fees that they never thought they would have to pay. So that's one issue. The second issue is the security deposit alternative ordinance. I think there are ways in which the security deposit alternative program or tool could be used to benefit tenants. The idea is that for tenants who can't afford a security deposit up front, it makes it somewhat more affordable for them. They can pay over time through a company that provides this essentially insurance product. There's a couple of ways, though, in which the ordinance as it's currently written doesn't adequately protect tenants. First, there's nothing that prevents landlords from charging more than the security deposit package. For instance, if the company like Lease or Rhino charges $25 a month to the tenant, landlords can charge $50 if they want to the tenants for this. Because most of the time the landlord is the one in contract with the security deposit alternative. Second, nothing prevents the landlord from treating tenants who use this product less favorably than other tenants, for instance, charging them more rent or a higher application fee. Nothing also prevents the company that provides this product from then going after tenants to satisfy the landlord's damage claims. And this is an issue we've seen. It's been all over the news with some of these products where the tenant is paying the $25 a month. They think they're protected, so that then when they walk away from that home, if the landlord makes a claim and says, you know, the tenant damaged this or that thing, landlord then goes to Lease Lock or whatever company, makes that claim, and then that company goes after the tenant for that. And there are a couple of problems with that. One is it likely wasn't disclosed to the tenant up front that that was going to be happening. And two, it essentially goes around our security deposit statute, which, you know, of the parts of landlord-tenant law in Georgia is one of the more robust. It provides some protections about inspections that have to happen and certain ways that tenants are protected if a landlord does not return their security deposit. So if it happens through one of these companies and the company goes after the tenant for these damage claims the landlord has, they don't have the same protections that they would if the landlord were just withholding their security deposit. There's also no rule that the landlord has to provide a tenant options about what company they get to go with. So there's not necessarily competition in the marketplace. The landlord could just say, I'm providing the security deposit alternative and it's this company, and take it or leave it, or pay a full month's rent in security deposit. So I think that's a few ways that the security deposit alternative ordinance could be made more robust and a little bit more protective for tenants. Third goes to the Section 8 issue. And I'm really glad that my colleagues at Atlanta Housing Authority were here to talk about it, and I think even a couple of their slides show the problem of Section 8 tenants renting in the city of Atlanta. It's a massive problem. It's one that I've seen through clients that I have, who I will call up apartment complexes for them to try to find them a place that will rent to a Section 8 voucher holder. No one in the city will do that anymore. No multifamily complexes will do it, other than the ones there's a couple in, I think, Pittsburgh and a few other places, but no one else in the city is going to rent to a Section 8 tenant anymore, and that's a problem. I know we have an ordinance on the books that says that that's illegal, and I also know that there are a lot of people that think that that ordinance is not enforceable because of the preemption restrictions in Georgia law. Well, a way the city can get around that is by using other levers that it has to essentially require developers and landlords that are getting city money for projects to build new complexes to require them to accept Section 8 vouchers. And this would be on top of affordability requirements, because here's part of the problem with affordability and relying on just that alone, is these complexes that have certain number of units set aside for affordable, for tenants, low-income tenants, those wait lists are long. You can't get on those wait lists. And if you're a Section 8 tenant and you have to move, you probably have about 60 days to find a new place to use your voucher. You can't get on a wait list for an affordable place. And if you do, you're probably going to have to give up your voucher anyway. Because of the double subsidy issue. So really what we need is landlords with market rate units, and you heard Atlanta Housing Authority say that they pay market rent, and they do. There are some places in the city in the Buckhead area that will pay rents over $1,500 for a one-bedroom place for somebody who would accept a Section 8 tenant, in addition to the other incentives they provide. But you cannot get a single landlord in Buckhead to rent to a tenant on Section 8. So it's a big problem, and it's one that as we see more development in the city, I think the city really could play a role by using the power of the money that it has, that it's giving through bonds or tax incentives or other things like that. They could use that to require landlords to accept Section 8 vouchers. Then we wouldn't have underutilized vouchers like Atlanta Housing Authority talked about. Finally, code enforcement. So this is an issue we see a lot in our office, and it's frustrating, so I thought I would bring it up here. Code enforcement, I think generally tries to do a really good job of holding landlords accountable when they are not making repairs. And I think code enforcement, like all other, city services, has been stretched very, very thin these last few years. So it's really not about their capacity. It's more about sort of the secrecy surrounding their reports. What we see is that when tenants complain to code enforcement and they get a code enforcement officer to come out, that officer will write up a report, and then they put it in their office and they won't give it to the tenant because they say this is an ongoing investigation. We can't give it to the tenant. So then if that tenant has to go to court to prove that their landlord failed to make repairs, they don't have access to that report because code enforcement said, no, it's our policy that we're not going to share this with tenants until, or we're not going to make this report available until the investigation is closed. And I don't know how long that usually takes them, but I bet it's slower than our eviction court, because eviction court, as you heard, is very fast. So really, those are the issues I wanted to talk about. I wanted to sort of distill it down to a few of the key ones that I've seen through my work and my colleagues have seen, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Your speed in which you did it, too.
Well, I thought I had 5 minutes, so I'm like going through.
This is a lot to absorb, just because I really appreciated that. Yes, these seem very actionable, and I want to action them. But I am curious with the hidden fees portion that you discussed earlier. Do you have data, or maybe it's just anecdotal based on your case work that you've done? I'm curious what percentage of multifamily or apartments or landlord situations have fees like this, and what type of fees show up more frequently than others. And I'm just curious kind of the scale of the problem, and I don't know if you have a way to quantify that, but we'd love to get some more information on that.
I can't quantify it. I can tell you that for about a little less than a year, I ran our rental assistance project in DeKalb County. Through that project, we worked with a couple thousand tenants who were approved for rental assistance through DeKalb. And so through that process, we saw a lot of leases and a lot of ledgers. And we had to go through them one by one because DeKalb County, like a lot of the rental assistance programs, won't pay a lot of these extra, what are sometimes called junk fees when they're paying rental assistance. So we had to go through one by one and take out the stuff that was not allowed. The vast majority of multifamily landlords are using these fees to different extents. I mean, it's pretty well expected that water and sewer is going to be a fee on top of somebody's rent. Although if it's a set fee, I don't know why you just can't make it part of the rent. It's one thing if it's going to be variable and you don't know unit to unit, but if you're going to say everyone in this complex pays $70 for a one-bedroom unit, why not just make it part of the rent? Because then it's upfront, and it's easy for that tenant to see if they can afford that or not. So, yeah, I don't have numbers, but I can tell you anecdotally that the vast majority of multifamily landlords are using them, especially in low-income communities.
Yeah. And I'm curious, too, and I know that's a similar question of Allison with the Housing Justice League, but recognizing that your policy proposals are relatively local or things that the city could potentially take on, I'm curious what has been done elsewhere in the state on this front, and where there's maybe some opportunity for Atlanta to look at one of our sister or peer cities to do something local here in Georgia that may stand a scrutiny of state law or preemption. I'm curious if there's been examples of things like this that have been done elsewhere and across the state.
You mean for the fees specifically, or?
Well, for some of the things you described, everything from the fees to the security deposit alternative ordinance to just all the above, really. I'm curious what's been done before.
There's no other cities that I know of that are doing anything about this. I think the hidden fees is becoming a problem that's sort of reaching a breaking point. And like I said, it's not something that we saw with as much frequency 2 years ago before the pandemic. It's really kind of, it's not a new issue, but it's getting to sort of crisis levels, I think. So I haven't seen any other places address it. As far as the security deposit alternative, City of Atlanta is the only one that I know of in the state that has that ordinance, although there are other places in the country where those same companies essentially, got the security deposit alternative ordinance put into local ordinances. So I think, there are ways in which they've been limited in other cities, and I can get back to you with some ideas of other cities and other states, but not here in Georgia.
No worries. It's always curious to see, what's been done before. The hidden fees thing is so interesting to me, just because I know, I opened this particular work section talking about the increase of rents. I know Josh Humphreys talked about that as well, but this particular caveat isn't necessarily reflected in that data, and so the scope of this issue is much larger than what might appear just because it doesn't. And so it's something that I'm wrestling with a little bit as I'm up here right now. But yeah, that's my only other question that I have. I'll let Councilman Bakhtiari ask her questions, and then we'll go from there.
Hi. I think we have a meeting tomorrow, don't we?
We do.
So First question, and this might be, you might not have the answer. I'm just curious, as you were talking, came up in my thoughts. Do we have any idea how many evictions are related to owners trying to convert their property into STRs or Airbnb rentals?
I don't know.
Yeah, because that's something I've been curious about, because I'm sure that we've seen an increased number of evictions due to a desire to feed into the STR market. The other thing I was going to ask, actually, I was curious, I wrote it down, let me find it. The utilization of vouchers, do we know how many people can't find a landlord to take their voucher?
The exact number, but we have a higher increase of members we check never had since I've been at the organization. I don't have the number.
No number, but it's a higher percentage than they've ever seen before. And I think I'm guessing a lot of this has to do with the tight rental market, and the fact that landlords probably don't feel like they have to, even though or there's negative stereotypes about voucher holders. I think there's probably some race discrimination going on, especially in places that are not currently occupied by people of color, like in the Buckhead neighborhoods. Like I think there's sort of a mix of things, but I don't know the numbers of how much. I know that one of the ways that somebody loses a voucher is that if they give their current landlord notice that they're going to leave, or the landlord gives them notice that they have to leave, they get a certain amount of time to search, and if they exceed that amount of time and they have not found a place, the voucher just goes away. There's no hearing, there's no nothing. They just lose it. And that's it, and they're no longer a voucher holder. And the wait list that they talked about, that's, I guess, 24,000 people long, it's not currently open, and I think it opens about once a decade or so, so getting back on the voucher program is maybe going to happen when they're 90 years old or something.
That makes me also think to how many properties that through inclusionary zoning that are meant to be made affordable. I wonder, do we have any, is it required, this might not be a you question, this might be a legal question, the properties that are listed through inclusionary zoning that are required to be built, do we have any requirement that they actually be listed on the market and not go to family and friends first?
There's an actively marketed requirement on that.
Okay. And then the other question, we currently have an 11,000 case backlog on evictions, is that true? I think we have right now, 11,000 cases of people that are waiting. Okay. Do we know, I'm getting nods from the audience, it's like a phone a friend situation. Do we know, like in that period of time, do you know, like if you were representing one of those clients, what is happening during the period in which their case is being heard?
I mean, a couple of things are happening. One is the landlord is refusing to renew their lease. So some of these tenants are operating under leases that haven't been renewed for the last 2 years. The landlords are often charging them, 10 and 20% late fees every month. The tenants, a lot of them stay there if they're not harassed into leaving or illegally evicted, which does happen more than we would want it to. But a lot of landlords are trying to find ways to make up their money. So they're raising people's rents, and sometimes I've seen people's rents go up every 3 months or so, and the landlords claim that it's like keeping up with the market, but they're also charging tenants sometimes month-to-month fees on top of that rent increase, and the month-to-month fee is typically $150 to $250 per month on top of the late fees that they're paying. So mostly what's happening is tenants are essentially getting further and further and further into debt. And hopefully they're able to access some rental assistance, and hopefully the landlord agrees to accept it. But if not, then they have sometimes a little more time in their unit, but they're much further in debt, and then they have this eviction on their record that makes it absolutely impossible for them to rent the next place.
Yes, I was going to say, so that also, we're talking about situations in which we're actively putting people onto the street and building and feeding into our homeless population.
It's one way to look at it.
I would say so. Is there any way that you could work with me to create a list of some of the low-hanging fruit that the city could go ahead and start working to pass ordinances on?
I almost called my presentation low-hanging fruit, yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
I guess that would be like agenda topic 1 for tomorrow's meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had another question, and I can't remember what it is, so we'll just go ahead and go to the next phase of this work session, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, and I'm still here through the end if you think of it.
Yeah. So I recognize, I know we're getting late in the day, but the next item on the agenda is discussion. And typically what that means is myself and the rest of my colleagues, bicker amongst ourselves to figure out, how to move forward with some of these things. But just recognizing the unique there's two of us, there's a lot of y'all, and there's a lot of information that was presented today. I do want to give...
One more housing voucher question?
Yeah, you can ask one more question, and then I'll finish my thought.
Yes, one more housing voucher question. What is the impact of corporate landlords? Do we know the impact of corporate landlords that are buying properties in the metro area, the impact that that's having on the Housing Choice Voucher Program?
We know that when the corporate landlords buy new properties or flip them, they are giving our families notices to vacate. So they are asking families to move from the unit once they purchase them. Some of our families have been there, like the lady in DeKalb, for many, many years, and then they're being asked to move. And we have literally picked up the phone to negotiate with those landlords to say, hey, we're selling our program, you're going to get the rent. The person's been there for years, and they just want no part of the program. So maybe because we don't allow them to add those hidden fees, and, we're very strict about the rent and different things they can charge. So that could be the process, as well as why they're not allowing these families to remain, because they've been there for years. They get their rent every month, but they're really opting out, and we're getting 10 to 15 notices to vacate a month for our families. And so some we're able to save, but most we give a voucher. We're starting to help them find units, which is challenging.
So I do want to give folks in the audience an opportunity to ask questions or share reflections or thoughts. I do ask that you come to the microphone just so that it's recorded for the public record. And if you don't have a reflection or a thought, that is okay as well. But just want to give you all the opportunity to speak. And then also I do recognize that we do have 3 people who have signed up for public comment. And so after we do some general questions or reflections or thoughts, we'll ask folks to come up to the mic to speak in order. And those folks are Zachary Murray, Ayanna Jones, and Monica Johnson in that order. So just generally want to give folks an opportunity to either ask questions or share their thoughts.
I just have a comment that I think is very important to put on the record. I know that Josh from the Department of Planning was naming off a couple of organizations that was supporting or over in Forest Cove. And I think it's very important to acknowledge the work that's been done with the Housing Justice League. I think they've been the organization, along with AVLF, on the ground supporting tenants. But the most important organization that needs to be recognized is the Tenants Association at Forest Cove. Had not been for their persistence and their advocacy to have better and decent housing, I don't think this city would be complying to their or hearing their cry. And salute to Mayor Dickens for, coming in to support the community. But Mayor Dickens also served on his council for a number of years while Forest Cove sat in the conditions that it did. So I just want to make sure that that's on the record to acknowledge the work that has been done on the ground. And HJL and the Tenants Association at Forest Cove did a lot of grinding and hard work to make sure that they were able to organize themselves out of the current conditions.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Anyone else? And Zach, this
isn't a comment, just a question for the Housing Authority. I wanted to ask about the Home Flex program. What percentage of those Home Flex project-based vouchers are being utilized on redeveloped Atlanta Housing Authority properties? And what percentage of those go to private developers as opposed to nonprofit or CDCs?
The Home Flex properties that I've mentioned, they're not on AH-owned properties. They're with private developers. So 100% of what I talked about was home flex with private developer and partners. None of them are on our AH sites.
Any other questions? Yes. But I love this little dance that we're doing as we're coming to the microphone. It's so official.
I also...
if you could state your name too, just for the record as well.
Monica Johnson, so may or may not have public comment later. But I'm concerned if there's any answers. I'm glad that it was brought up, the widespread denial of vouchers. So, very much want to underline that something the city should step in on. I'm also wondering with this FLOW program and the FUP program, I think it's also a question of outreach to people that are in need of these things, but how can we make it better accessible for people to access those programs, and how long do those application processes take? Because there are several people I know that are living in slum conditions and are like separated from their children and have to find housing in order to get their children back, and they're having to do it kind of the private way. So I wonder if there's any way, and of course, if we are able to bring in an office of the tenant advocate to help streamline some of these efforts, how we can make it so that folks who are facing these issues, and there's obviously a gap in what they're able to access when it comes to housing, how can we get it so that it's not so many people falling through the cracks in that situation?
It says that was a question for Atlanta Housing.
Yeah, but also I think the city, it's like sort of necessary to streamline a process in which people who are in need of housing for different ways. If all of these programs exist, why is it that so many are not able to access them? And how can we rectify that?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you just on the last piece. I'm happy to. I'm definitely I'm taking a lot in, and I would love to explore how we can make that happen. So I don't have an answer on how we can do that, but I definitely hear you. On the first piece, it sounded like there were some specific questions around how can we better communicate programs that exist within Atlanta Housing. So I do want to give them opportunity to answer
you guys
that.
could speak to Flo.
Several of our programs are, those Haven programs that I spoke about are our Haven programs, and Partners for Home and the COC are the point of contact for several of our programs. So the FLOW program is a contact through Partners for Home. They make the referrals and we issue those vouchers. As far as the FUP program, it's a program with HUD and DFACS. So families, DFACS has that direct connection to those families who are searching for units for, or are aware of those families who are broken up and need to be reunified. They make those referrals to us. So when they're working with a family, they refer those families to us. So those contacts are through the agencies that provide either the referrals or the partnership that we have with them or HUD. So communication is important. One reason I wanted to share these programs, because most people don't know we have them. So just kind of reaching out to the Atlanta Housing Authority, our staff will be willing and available to walk you through the programs, the requirements, the point of contacts, and how do you make those referrals. The referrals today are the quickest way to get a housing choice voucher. The waiting list is long and expansive, so those families who are coming in on referrals do get a voucher without having to wait several years. So the referral programs are our most effective, most time-sensitive program by which you can be housed.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi there, Phil Kelly.
Appreciate the work session put on and for being here and all the presentations, super informative. For the administration's goal of 20,000 units preserving or creating, would love to see council members and Department of Planning give some more specifics. You know, they talked about the units or the displacement that's happened. They had a map that showed low-income displacement. It'd be great to see some more detail of the number of units that we've lost in each neighborhood, maybe projections with gentrification happening in certain areas. We can see that happening a little bit, and then to overlay that with this goal. So, what are the actual goals of number of units we want to see in these NPUs? And if we can set some actual tangible goals, then we know if we're actually reaching them, if we have to do more to reach them, making sure that we are definitely putting deep affordability in higher neighborhoods that are becoming more and more high income. And so we'd love to see that kind of detail overlaid, for example, with the map of the publicly owned land so that you can start to visualize where that development can actually happen. And then just for the Atlanta Housing Authority, just curious if you give the tenants kind of a self-report renter's checklist, something I've seen before, where they can go through on their own and make their own assessments, kind of again in regards to what they're legally entitled to, or with your policies, what they're entitled to in their unit, so that they feel empowered to report certain things that you talked about. You do give them at the initial issuing or maybe in the annual inspection. So that was one question, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. And while Atlanta Housing comes up to answer that question, I know Josh Humphreys with the Office of Housing had to step out, but I'll make sure he gets that comment so that we can see what we can do to get better data going forward.
Yes, sir. When the residents get their vouchers, there's something called housing obligation, and that housing obligation pretty much outlines what their rights are, what is included in them being a tenant or being on our program. So yes, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. And if y'all are okay, we'll make y'all the last two questions, and then we'll go into public comment.
Hi, absolutely. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Precious Price. I specifically had a comment regarding what was spoken about with the Office of Housing and Community Development. I know that there was a ton of talk in regards to leveraging the public land in terms of creating that affordable housing, just so that we can create some more supply for everyone here in the city. As I have mentioned before, some people might know, but how can we also maybe use that same type of framework to then utilize the private land that we have for these homeowners? So private land being, I even think about the ordinances that we had last year in terms of the accessory dwelling units and being able to build on top of your garage, build in your backyard. How are we able to maybe bring those ordinances back so then that can then create or flow into the pipeline that we are talking about of creating landlords who are willing to create this affordable housing? Because I know myself, I think about me, I have this extra land and I am more than willing to have someone build on it and, be a benefit to this housing supply. But where do I begin? Is that even an option for me? Because right now it's really the number one, exclusionary zoning, but then number two, it's also all of the zoning kind of restrictions that we have that are getting in the way of us doing that.
You want to address?
Yeah, I was just going to speak to that. I know you framed it as a comment, but I do want to speak to that. And just want to also acknowledge, I know Josh Humphreys is back with us. I know his ears were probably burning.
Yeah, you say the word ADU or MRMU, and Josh will come running.
I will say that what you described is something that I absolutely support, the need to increase density through market-based approaches. I recognize that there was somewhat of a political setback on that front last year. I do look forward to that legislation, maybe not necessarily verbatim, but in spirit coming back in some form. But I also recognize, too, that we're, as a city, are in search of a new planning commissioner. So I know there's some pieces that need to kind of come back in place to build something that, A, is better communicated to the public, B, ensures that public concerns are addressed and see makes it something that people recognize is not only important for the health of our city, but is reflective of our city's unique history. A lot of the housing types that would be allowed through this legislation and for things that we were already building as a city until the 60s or 70s. And I think about communities where I use West End as an example because I represent West End, but in the 1970 census, we had 20,000 residents in West End. Today, only 5,000. And part of that, yes, we tore down family homes to build highways. Part of that is we tore down apartments to build strip malls. And part of it is we build, you see these gorgeous Victorian homes, 3,000 square feet with 4 or 5 chimneys on it. That's 4 or 5 families that lived in that building that now only has 1 family living in it. So, and now there's no longer any legal mechanism in place to allow for that to be converted back to either multifamily or what used to be duplexes that were converted to single family to be converted back to duplexes. And so I think myself and my colleagues are at least more than just me, are very interested in revisiting that conversation. But I do recognize that you're one of those. Thank you. I appreciate it. We got some backup over here. But I think we do got to get some additional pieces in place to move forward with that. And I think getting a new planning commissioner on board is part of that. But also making sure that we do our due diligence as elected officials representing districts that, I have constituents that tell me all the time how much they hated that legislation. And I'm like, hey, look, I hear you. We're going to work together. I'm going to try to get you in a different place because I do think that that's our job, to communicate policy and to advocate for policy. And I campaign on this, so I'm not going to shy away from it at all. And so I really appreciate you advocating for that as a property owner that wants to do that and have additional tools available for you to do that. I think you have folks on council who are
absolutely
pushing that direction.
Absolutely. And I will also say that what I've found, at least, is that those people who are opposing that ordinance or opposing, this new introduction of it, it's typically those people who they're in the aging population, right? Like usually they're opposing it because of them, but not necessarily thinking about the benefit that it can have as a larger community for all of us. You oppose it as personally for yourself, but I can still oppose it personally and support it publicly.
Yeah. So you and I you emailed. We have a meeting scheduled. We're going to talk about this. Yeah, I have meetings with everybody in this room. To your point, I think someone once said it to me best. We have so much unused occupancy, like unused opportunities for occupancy within the city of Atlanta. So ADUs are one of those innovative ways, and even CDUs, commercially, so people can work from their homes. But these are huge opportunities, not to be corrupted by short-term rental, but huge opportunities to give people a place to live because, quite frankly, we don't need massive single-family houses. We need to be working towards cluster developments and doing more density around that. And what the city is going to have to do is we're going to have to do our due diligence. I'm going to be partnering up with Josh to do a traveling town hall through my district to talk about housing and density and transportation, because there are so many people, like you said, that are afraid of this. We had a huge opportunity for an affordable, dense development that a lot of seniors were against because to them the change means they're going to be pushed out of their homes. When in fact, basic economics, supply and demand, if there's more demand than there is supply, then the cost of that finite supply is going to shoot up. So you have to build more housing, you have to increase the supply, but in a thoughtful, intentional way. And I don't just mean luxury housing. I'm talking mixed income, because you need your working class community right here. We need 15-minute cities, multiple 15-minute cities within our city. So what you're doing, it's great that you're coming and saying, I want to help people and I want to use my space. So what we need to do is we have to push the conversation, because just because people don't like it and are scared of it doesn't mean we need to shy away from it. The difficult work is working with people to bring them along with the change and explaining to them why, not just doing things or not doing things because it's hard. So Josh and I also have a meeting, and we are going to be. We have 4 meetings, and we're going to be diving into that as well. But you and I will have that meeting and talk about it. But it's going to be difficult because people hear the word density and it's a really polarizing word, and we're going to have to figure out a way around that.
Exactly, and I'm finding that it's really the education around it that's going to be the biggest piece for our communities.
There's going to need to be a lot of outreach. So.
Thank you so much.
And I'll just final comment to that comment, just to say that what's beautiful about that, I think, is just for general public's awareness. It's not an either or; it's a yes and. So yes, there are subsidy programs that we're trying to support. Yes, there are tenant protections that we're trying to support. Yes, that we're trying to make sure that there are greater opportunities to ensure that people can find a place to stay in the city through our housing vouching programs. But also there are market rate ways to support these programs through the market as well, and ensuring that the apartment folks aren't having heartburn or heart palpitations with some of the policy proposals, but knowing that there's a lot of different tools available to us, or should be available to us, every city, to address this affordable housing issue. And I look forward to working with my colleagues and working with the public and working with our advocacy organizations to ensure that we can use all those tools. And I know each one has a different set of challenges to be made real. But I think that's why you have folks like myself and Councilman Bakhtiari and several others who were up to the challenge. That's why we ran. That's why we're here. And so
that's why we don't sleep anymore.
So we don't sleep anymore. But I just really appreciate that comment, because I think it points to the fact that it's not just this, that, and the other. It's all of the above. That we have a lot of tools that we have available to us. Let's use them.
Absolutely. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll have you be our last question or / comment, and then we'll go ironically into public comment, and then we'll close it out.
Sure. I'm Seth Daniels. I'm with the Atlanta Apartment Association. Thank you, Councilmember Dozier and Councilmember Bakhtiari, for doing this work session. So we're here today listening and taking notes, and there was a lot of information. But we're here today because we don't want to just say no to things. We really do want to be a constructive partner in these solutions. This, I think, is an issue. Housing affordability is an issue that is really one that I think might be the biggest of our generation, at least for the foreseeable future. But one thing that I do want to address today, because it seems to be top of everyone's mind, is the housing choice vouchers. We love Atlanta Housing. We promote the housing choice voucher program to our members. There's obviously a lot of work to do there to get more buy-in. We've worked with Atlanta Housing to try to make it as landlord-friendly as possible, and I think we have stretched it to the limits of federal regulation, right? Is that fair? Yeah. But there is changes to the federal law on this coming through the Choice and Affordable Housing Act that is working through the Senate right now. So we are supporting those changes at the federal level and support additional changes at the local level as best we can, and are very interested in getting more participation in the Housing Choice Voucher Program.
Thank you so much, Seth. With that, we'll go into public comment. So the first comment, Mr. Zachary Murray. And so even though I extended this work session beyond our 3 o'clock hit time, I am very cognizant that 4 o'clock is right around the corner. So I am going to ask we only have 3 public comments. I'm going to ask our 3 public commenters to give yourselves 3 minutes, plus or minus 30 seconds, and just to keep it moving, but just wanted to give you an opportunity.
Yeah, I'm watching the clock because my car has to be moved at 4 o'clock for rush hour anyways, so y'all not going to refund my ticket, are you? Okay, so my name is Zach Murray. I'm an organizing director with the Guild and also a resident homeowner, landlord in Lakewood Heights, chair of the Lakewood Heights Community Association, and just wanted to touch on a couple of things. I'm here primarily to stand in support of the Housing Justice League, in solidarity with them on their ask for the Tenant Bill of Rights. It's incredibly important that we provide a right to counsel for folks. This is something the City of Atlanta can do right now. There are 2 additional cities to add to the list of 7 that the Housing Justice League presented today. Just this month, New Orleans and Detroit passed this right. They are cities who have far worse economic prospects than the City of Atlanta, so there's no excuse for us to not provide universal support and access to counsel for tenants who desperately need it. My next-door neighbors were evicted. Not a week goes by that neighbors in my community aren't evicted. They don't have recourse right now. We need to provide that recourse to ensure that folks, when they have the opportunity, can stay. Additionally, the right to counsel does not work if there is not support for tenant organizing. that a portion of the Housing Trust Fund must be utilized to ensure that groups like the Housing Justice League, who are doing miracle work of going door to door to inform people of their rights, can continue to do so. They deserve public support. The money is there to do so. The right cannot be utilized because lawyers don't go door to door. It cannot be utilized if there is not support from the City Council for this. I wanted to also touch on the small site preservation option that the Housing Justice League brought up. We have a lot of people who are being evicted for no cause, no fault of their own because the landlord decides they want to convert the property to Airbnb, short-term rental, or because they want to sell the property. We need to create funding in areas that are known as naturally occurring affordable housing to ensure that those properties can be acquired, that those tenants have the right to remain, that those properties can move into permanent affordability. This is happening in cities across the country, and there's no excuse at this point, with the availability of our Housing Trust Fund, that we can't move to this order. This may require new capacity because the Atlanta Land Trust largely functions in redevelopment of vacant properties. So we may need special capacity that functions for tenant and owner-occupied properties. That's something for the City Council to consider. I do want to touch on also the remarks brought up by the Housing Authority. I think they misunderstood my comment. We have a chronic dependence here in Atlanta on private partnership, and it is inefficient economically. The reality is that it's not their fault on the Section 8 vouchers. That's the federal requirement, that we utilize the market in order to provide affordable housing. But the market does not go down in the cost of rents. And so if we aren't creating a permanently affordable stock of housing, we will always be losing in our ability to continue to provide this social good of housing because the market has no incentive to be affordable on its own. The Atlanta Housing Authority did not discuss today the redevelopment of their properties. That's a critical piece of the puzzle that we have to understand in what's happening to renters in this city. There used to be the availability of affordable housing for people who needed it. They demolished those places. And now we're dependent on private developers almost exclusively for profit to redevelop those places. They get the 9% tax credit, which is a 78% coverage of their development costs by the federal government. They also do get a layer of project-based vouchers. We heard about that at Inglewood. That was the intent of my question, was to talk about on the redeveloped properties, to what extent are these private developers accessing project-based vouchers in the ways that nonprofit developers can't. The Housing Authority largely does not partner with local CDCs and nonprofits. I didn't get to a third of what I wanted to say, but hopefully we'll have you here to do that at a later point in time. Thank you.
Absolutely. I actually was going to let you go a little bit longer. But I didn't realize the
Zach, church is on Sunday.
online stopwatch.com gives you an audio cue. But I appreciate you, Mr. Murray. All right, next, Ayanna Jones.
Yes, I am the co-director for the Safe and Stable Home Project at Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, AVLF. I've had the opportunity to work with everybody that has spoken, and so I'm going to be really, really quick as well. But I think there are some opportunities for policies based on models around the country to protect renters that we're missing. I'm going to try to hit all these points, but, Lily, we can talk. But these specific things that I'm going to mention affect the tenant's ability to rent decent and safe housing. The first one is related to the sealing of records around COVID. So anytime you file an eviction, not if you win, but if you file, it's a public record. And so, did I just go out or y'all can still hear me? Okay. So the sealing of the record specifically around COVID, but it could be discretionary as well. And there are several models in several cities around the country that allow for judicial discretion as well as mandatory sealing of records that would allow tenants to have more access to different types of housing rather than be turned down by landlords for arbitrary reasons. Two, facilitate the distribution of funds. The emergency rental assistance funds, like DCA, currently has $4 million, but they're tied to COVID restrictions, and so there needs to be a way to maybe hold them more accountable or find ways to distribute those funds, because now 2 years into COVID, it's not always COVID related, as we've talked about why people lose their housing. So there needs to be a bigger push that if there is this money, we need to have the will for DCA and other agencies to distribute it in a way that is more applicable to the situations of the people in and around the city. I support code enforcement. That can be an amazing tool in court, but with only 2 weeks to go to trial, you have to requisition those records. You have to do a FOIA request. They have to find it. They have to have officers that actually went out to the property and officers that are following the policy of not contacting the landlord first, instead of going out to the property, talking to the tenant, making those reports. So more oversight and enforcement given to code enforcement and more officers. Also, a repository for the registry of rent when repairs and conditions is an issue. We've got tenants paying rent for substandard housing, and it's really a logical argument. If I'm living with a hole in my ceiling, I don't think that I should have to pay rent or even have to make this really accurate counterclaim. Let me pay the rent into the court and let the burden be on the landlord to show that this is a housing quality issue and it's not something that the tenant has to try to prove with evidentiary means. It becomes an obstacle. Enforcement of self-help evictions. I can't tell you how many times we get calls where the landlord has locked someone out with all of their proof that they lived there. And so the police come out or someone comes out and the tenant says, I don't have proof. And the landlord says, well, that's a civil issue. And my last point is the notice of an active live writ. We've got writs of possession that are out there, and tenants were never notified that the landlord filed an affidavit, which could be a false affidavit, that they didn't accept rent after supposed default. That is an absolute bar to the writ of possession being there where the sheriffs can come out. But if the tenant didn't have any notice of it, how did they then file with the court to stop the repercussions from that? So love to have further conversation about that. Thank you for being patient.
Ms. Ayana, before you step away. Ms. Ayana, come back. And before you step away, is this something that we would be able to combat through structuring access to counsel?
Some of it is, but some of it is also working with the court and creating these specific things like what the court registry can take in and not take in, those kinds of things.
Thank you, and I look forward to our 100 scheduled meetings that we have in the coming weeks.
Yay!
Just for the record, the only reason why Councilmember Bakhtiari has time to meet with everyone all the time is that she didn't end up with all the board assignments that I did. So our calendars are...
Not a competition, Jason, but if it was, I'm winning.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Jones. All right, next up, Monica Johnson, and you'll round this out, and then I'll give some closing remarks and go from there.
A lot of things have been addressed somewhat, so hopefully we'll be making some movement on things like that are causing, well, let me not waste my time on that. Anyway, so one of the main things I want to emphasize is that when we speak about like the Forest Cove situation, we have to acknowledge that the process that was laid out, and it was touted as a very progressive process, and it was going to take so much, it was going to use so much energy and all these things, failed when it came to actually getting the tenants relocated, and now we've had to have Atlanta Housing step in. So I think, it seems that we were told a lot that APD Urban has the ability to abate a lot of the issues that tenants face in getting new housing, records and things like that. I think that utility, there's a lot of utility in that feature when it comes to getting rehoused on any other, for tenants in any other situation. So I want us to be able to use the tools at our disposal that actually have them work. Last time we were here, I spoke about a tenant I know in the Vine City in Byron Amos's district, and I've been trying to get a situation worked out with her. She's living in slum conditions, and code enforcement has been putting listings up on the property and boarding up the windows and all those things. However, the landlord is still, I guess, fine to operate, but they've had their cars towed off the property. So it seems that these these processes that could be protective, as we just heard, are actually, again, helping out the landlords and not the tenants. Also, the Atlanta housing situation, I think it's also true that we need more just specific housing that is purposefully built at an affordable rate. And we also, we think of a $20,000 or 20,000 unit goal. I don't believe that that's actually enough for how many people actually need affordable housing. So I think, again, we need to use all the tools at our disposal to increase the stock of affordable housing, and not just through public-private partnerships. I've also seen, when it comes to eviction court, in Athens, Georgia, while they had rental assistance funding, or I think they still are using it, they're preventing the evictions from being executed until rental assistance, or if it's an issue of non-payment, rental assistance being provided. So I think that if we can, compel the courts to take out a process like that for the city of Atlanta, it would do a lot, especially with how much money is left. I think that's about it. Hopefully, we'll continue to be, I imagine we'll continue to be in communication. But I think, we have a major crisis going on in how people can maintain living in the city, and I think we can't just kind of use the sort of old opportunities to fix this issue. We have to be bold, and we have to use the tools at our disposal and make sure that they're actually working for tenants, and make sure that when there's flagrant violations by landlords, that there's actually
Atlanta and surrounding areas. It's that time of year where we celebrate our seniors. I'm Monica Pearson. Welcome to the Aging Well Expo 2022. It's truly an honor to be here as your host yet again. As always, we have so much in store for you this year. And to our presenting sponsor, Georgia Power, and partnership sponsors with City of Atlanta, mayors